Single dad lost his only job helping a woman during a robbery. She was the city's richest widow. He thought he ruined his life saving a stranger, until the woman he rescued showed up at his door, and his act of kindness turned into the miracle that would change both their worlds forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The first rays of morning light crept through the threadbare curtains of apartment 3B, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Caleb Turner's eyes opened at exactly 5:15 a.m., just like they had every morning for the past 20 years. First from military habit, now from necessity. He didn't need an alarm anymore. His body knew the rhythm of survival. The springs of his old couch creaked as he sat up, running a hand over his face. He'd given Grace the bedroom when Sarah passed away 5 years ago. The couch wasn't comfortable, but it was good enough. Besides, he'd slept in worse places during his Army days. The small kitchen was only a few steps away in their cramped apartment. Caleb moved quietly, not wanting to wake Grace just yet. His weathered hands reached for the coffee maker, a garage sale find that still worked despite its age. The familiar scent of brewing coffee slowly filled the space, mixing with the musty smell of old carpet and yesterday's rain that always seemed to seep through the walls. Opening the refrigerator, Caleb surveyed their modest supplies. 2 eggs left, half a gallon of milk, some bread that was still good. He could skip breakfast himself. It wouldn't be the first time. Grace needed it more than he did. As he cracked the eggs into a pan, his eyes drifted to the stack of bills on the counter. The red final notice stamp on the electric bill seemed to glow in the dim light. His jaw tightened, but he pushed the worry down. Grace didn't need to know about that. "Dad?" Grace's voice came from the hallway, still thick with sleep. "You're making eggs?" Caleb turned, and his face softened at the sight of his daughter. Even with her hair mussed from sleep and wearing her mother's old Christmas sweater as pajamas, she looked so much like Sarah, it made his heart ache. "Morning, sunshine," he said, managing a warm smile. "Thought you might like something hot for breakfast. It's getting chilly out there." Grace shuffled to the kitchen table, rubbing her eyes. "You should have woken me earlier. I could have helped. You needed your sleep. Big test in history today, remember?" She nodded, then frowned slightly. "Did you eat already?" "Had some toast earlier." Caleb lied smoothly, sliding the eggs onto a plate. He added 2 pieces of toast and set it in front of her. "Eat up while it's hot." Grace looked at the plate, then back at her father. She was too perceptive sometimes, just like her mother had been. "Dad, there were only 2 eggs left in the fridge yesterday. I counted." Caleb busied himself with washing the pan. "I'm not that hungry this morning anyway. Got a late dinner at work last night." Another small lie, but necessary. The truth was, he'd skip that meal too, stretching their grocery budget as far as it would go. "Promise you'll eat lunch later?" Grace asked, her voice small but insistent. Caleb dried his hands and turned to face her, seeing the concern in her eyes. It should be him worried about her, not the other way around. "I promise," he said, meaning it this time. "Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold." As Grace ate, Caleb sat across from her with his coffee. The morning light was stronger now, highlighting the worn spots in the tablecloth and the crack in the ceiling they'd been meaning to fix. But it also caught the gleam in Grace's eyes as she told him about her upcoming history test and the art project she was working on for class. "Mrs. Henderson says my sketches are getting better," Grace said between bites. "She thinks I might have a shot at that summer art program." "That's wonderful," Caleb said, genuinely proud. Then reality crept in. The program cost money they didn't have. But he couldn't bear to dim the hope in her eyes. "We'll figure something out." Grace's smile faltered slightly, and Caleb knew she understood the unspoken challenge. But she brightened again, resilient as always. "Maybe I could get a part-time job? Jenny works at the library on weekends." "No," Caleb said firmly. "Your job is school. I've got things covered." Grace finished her breakfast in thoughtful silence. As she carried her plate to the sink, she paused. "Mom would be proud of you, you know." The words caught Caleb off guard, making his throat tight. "What makes you say that?" "Because you never give up," Grace said simply. "Even when things are hard." Caleb stood and pulled his daughter into a hug, holding her close for a moment. She smelled like Sarah's old sweater and strawberry shampoo. "Go get ready for school, kiddo. We need to leave in 20 minutes. While Grace got dressed, Caleb quickly gathered his security guard uniform for his shift later. The patch on the sleeve was starting to come loose. He'd have to sew it back on during his break. The uniform was old, like everything else they owned, but he kept it clean and pressed. Pride in appearance was something the Army had taught him, and he wasn't about to let that go. The drive to school was quiet, both of them lost in thought, as the old sedan made its way through the awakening streets of Cedar Falls. The morning was gray, threatening rain. Caleb could smell it in the air, the same heavy dampness that made his old shoulder wound ache. As they pulled up to the school, Grace gathered her backpack. "Dad? Yeah? Things will get better, right?" Caleb looked at his daughter, seeing both the child she was and the young woman she was becoming. "They will," he said with conviction. He didn't quite feel. "We've got each other. That's what matters." Grace smiled and leaned over to kiss his cheek before climbing out of the car. Caleb watched her walk toward the school building, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. Other students streamed past in newer clothes, with newer backpacks. But Grace held her head high. The drive to Hilltop Gas and Mart was short. Caleb parked in his usual spot, noticing how the morning clouds had grown darker. The small store looked particularly shabby in the gray light, its faded signs and flickering fluorescent lights a testament to better days gone by. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, matching the weight of uncertainty in his chest. The evening shift at Hilltop Gas and Mart settled into its familiar routine as Caleb Turner adjusted his navy blue security uniform for the third time that hour. The polyester fabric had grown soft with countless washes, but he kept it pressed and clean, a habit from his Army days that he couldn't shake. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with their constant electrical drone, casting harsh white shadows across the empty aisles lined with chips, sodas, and overpriced convenience items. At this hour, nearly 10:30 on a Tuesday night, the store was usually as quiet as a church, save for the occasional late-night customer stumbling in for coffee, cigarettes, or emergency baby formula. Mike Reynolds lounged behind the counter like a man without a care in the world, flipping through a dog-eared magazine with the kind of disinterest that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His security badge hung crooked on his wrinkled uniform, the fabric bearing coffee stains and the rumpled evidence of a man who viewed his job as little more than paid sitting. The difference between the two men was clear in every detail, from their posture to their approach to the work that put food on their tables. Where Caleb stood alert and observant, Mike slouched. Where Caleb's uniform looked parade-ready, Mike's looked like he'd slept in it. "Man, I don't know how you do these night shifts without falling asleep," Mike said, stifling a yawn that stretched his face comically. "Especially after working that warehouse job all day, don't you ever get tired?" Caleb checked the security cameras with practiced efficiency, his movements precise and methodical as he cycled through each view. The black and white monitors showed empty parking lots, deserted gas pumps, and the quiet street beyond. "You get used to it," he said simply. "Besides, Grace needs new school supplies this month. Art class is expensive, but she's got real talent." The pride in his voice was unmistakable when he talked about his daughter. Grace had her mother's artistic eye and her father's gentle heart, a combination that made Caleb's chest swell with love every time he thought about her. "Your kid's in high school now, right? Man, time flies." Mike set down his magazine and stretched his arms above his head. "My Tommy just started middle school, and already he's asking for expensive sneakers. His mom's always on my case about child support too, like I'm made of money or something." "Every penny counts when you're raising a child," Caleb replied, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of experience. There was no judgment in his tone, just the quiet wisdom of a man who understood struggle. "They depend on us to provide, to protect, to be there when they need us most." Mike snorted, a sound that held more bitterness than humor. "Yeah, well, some of us didn't get that military discipline drilled into us like you did. Must make everything easier when you've got that kind of structure, huh?" Caleb paused his security check and turned slightly toward his coworker. His weathered hands rested on the counter's edge as he considered his response. "The Army taught me structure, Mike. That's true. But being a father that taught me purpose." His eyes, tired but kind, held a depth that spoke of loss and perseverance. "It's not about discipline keeping me going. It's about love." "There you go again with the deep stuff." Mike shook his head, but there was no real malice in his voice. "Between that and your church going every Sunday, you're like some kind of saint walking around here." A gentle smile touched Caleb's lips, the kind of smile that suggested he'd heard similar comments before. "Faith gives me strength when things get tough, when the bills pile up and Grace needs something I can't afford right away. Nothing saint-like about that. Just a man trying to do right by his family." He moved toward the large windows that faced the street, something outside catching his trained attention. The parking lot lights created uneven pools of yellow illumination across the asphalt, and beyond them lay the neighboring businesses that made up this small commercial strip. "Speaking of things being tough," Caleb said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "notice anything unusual about Evergreen tonight?" The grocery store next door, a family-owned market that had served the community for over 20 years, still had its lights blazing bright, well past its normal closing time of 10 p.m. The familiar closed sign hung in the front window, red letters visible even from their distance, but movement could clearly be seen through the glass. Shadows passed back and forth in a way that seemed hurried, almost frantic. "Probably just Mrs. Chen doing inventory or something," Mike shrugged, already returning his attention to the magazine. The pages crackled as he turned them. "You know how she is about keeping that place spotless, always cleaning, always organizing." But Caleb's instincts, those survival skills honed by years of military service in hostile territories, were beginning to spark to life. His eyes fixed on a black SUV sitting idle in the shadows between the two stores. Its engine running, but headlights dark. The vehicle seemed deliberately positioned to avoid the direct glare of the parking lot lights. Its windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see inside, and something about its placement felt intentional, calculated. "That SUV's been sitting there for 20 minutes now," Caleb noted, his voice dropping to the low, controlled tone he'd used when briefing soldiers. "No one's gotten in or out. Engines running, but no movement. Come on, Turner. Not everything's a tactical situation." Mike barely glanced up from an article about fishing lures. "This isn't Afghanistan. It's just suburban Ohio. People wait in cars all the time." "You're right. It's probably nothing." But even as he said the words, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling creeping up his spine like cold fingers. His body was responding to signals his conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet. The way the SUV sat at just the right angle to avoid security cameras, the unusual late-night activity at Evergreen, the combination of factors that individually meant little but together painted a troubling picture. He began his regular patrol route around the store's perimeter, his footsteps quiet and measured on the concrete. But every few seconds, his eyes would drift back to the grocery store, watching for any change in the pattern of movement inside. The night air carried the cool dampness of approaching rain, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before falling silent. The parking lot lights created those familiar pools of yellow illumination against the darkness, but deep shadows lurked in the spaces between them, shadows where someone could hide, could watch, could wait. "Mrs. Chen usually closes up sharp at 10 o'clock, Caleb muttered to himself, remembering the elderly store owner's military-precise routine. In all the months he'd worked this shift, he'd never seen her deviate from her schedule, never seen her stay late before, never. Returning inside, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him with their familiar whoosh, Caleb found Mike attempting to balance a yellow pencil on the tip of his nose. The sight was so absurd it almost made him smile despite his growing unease. "Really earning that paycheck tonight, aren't you?" he said, but there was fondness in his voice rather than criticism. "Hey, nothing ever happens here anyway." Mike defended himself, catching the pencil as it tumbled. "That's exactly why they hired us to stand around and look official. We're like scarecrows, but for shoplifters. We're here to protect people, Mike." Caleb's voice carried the weight of genuine belief. "That's not just a job we clock in and out of. It's a responsibility we carry." "There you go with the responsibility speech again." Mike rolled his eyes, but not unkindly. "You know what your problem is, Turner? You care too much about everything and everyone. The world's not going to end if we take it easy once in a while." Caleb was about to respond, maybe to explain that caring wasn't a problem but a choice, that someone had to stand guard while others slept safely, when movement outside caught his eye again. Through the windows, he saw the SUV's door open just a crack, revealing nothing but darkness inside, then close again with deliberate care. The action was subtle, careful, and it made every nerve in his body come alive with warning. "Mike," he said, his voice suddenly calm with the kind of authority that came from years of making life or death decisions. "Call the police, right now." "What? Why?" Mike straightened up in his chair, the magazine sliding off the counter. Something in Caleb's tone had cut through his casual indifference like a blade. "Just a precaution. Trust me on this." Caleb moved closer to the window, his body automatically shifting into a defensive posture. His muscles tensed beneath his uniform as training kicked in. "Something's not right over there." Come on, man. If I call the cops over nothing again, they'll stop taking us seriously. Remember what happened last month with that false alarm? The sound that cut through the night stopped all conversation cold, a woman's scream, sharp and desperate, filled with genuine terror. It came from the direction of Evergreen Groceries, piercing the quiet like a knife through silk. The scream held the unmistakable note of someone in mortal danger. Without conscious thought, without hesitation, without considering the consequences, Caleb was moving. His body responded before his mind could process the full implications of what he was about to do. The automatic doors barely had time to register his approach as he burst through them, his feet pounding against the asphalt as he ran toward the source of that terrified cry, toward whatever danger awaited him in the fluorescent-lit grocery store next door. The glass door of Evergreen Groceries burst open with a violent crack as Caleb rushed inside. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting unstable shadows across the chaos before him. Shelves had been knocked over, their contents scattered across the linoleum floor. The sharp scent of spilled cleaning supplies mixed with the metallic tang of fear in the air. A masked man in dark clothing had cornered a well-dressed woman against the checkout counter. His knife glinted menacingly in the unsteady light. Shards of broken glass from a shattered display case crunched under his boots as he advanced toward her. The woman's elegant gray suit was a stark contrast to the disorder around her, her perfectly manicured hands raised in surrender. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling but dignified. "Take whatever you want." Caleb's military training kicked in instantly. He assessed the situation in seconds. One armed assailant, one civilian in immediate danger, no visible accomplices. The robber hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on his target. Moving with the quiet efficiency that had kept him alive in combat, Caleb approached from behind. The woman's eyes flickered to him for just a moment, but she quickly looked away to avoid giving him away. Smart, Caleb thought. "Empty your jewelry too," the masked man demanded, gesturing with the knife. "Everything valuable, now!" Caleb seized his moment. In one fluid motion, he wrapped his arm around the robber's throat, simultaneously grabbing the wrist of his knife hand. The assailant thrashed, but Caleb's grip was ironclad. Years of training and muscle memory took over as they struggled. The knife slashed wildly, catching Caleb's forearm. He felt the sting, but maintained his hold. The woman scrambled away from the counter, knocking over her purse in her haste. Its contents spilled across the floor. Credit cards, makeup, and an ID card that skittered across the tiles. Caleb and the robber crashed into a display of canned goods, sending them rolling in all directions. The masked man was strong and desperate, but Caleb had faced worse odds. He twisted the assailant's arm behind his back, forcing him to drop the knife. It clattered to the ground as Caleb pinned him face down on the floor. "Stay down," Caleb commanded, his voice steady despite the burning in his arm. "The police are coming." The woman had backed against the far wall, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. Her perfectly styled silver hair was now disheveled, but her eyes were sharp and alert as she watched the scene unfold. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Caleb asked, maintaining pressure on the subdued robber. She nodded, trying to compose herself. "Yes, thanks to you. I can't believe you." Her voice trailed off as she noticed the blood seeping through his sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's just a scratch," Caleb assured her, though the cut stung fiercely. In the distance, police sirens grew louder. The woman moved to gather her scattered belongings, her hands still shaking. As she reached for her ID, Caleb caught a glimpse of the name, Margaret Holloway, the wealthy widow who owned half the city's real estate. He'd seen her photo in the newspaper, but those images hadn't captured the quiet strength in her, bearing, even in crisis. Blue and red lights flooded the store as police cars pulled up outside. 2 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Police! Everyone freeze!" "He's secure," Caleb called out calmly. "The knife is by the counter, and the lady is unharmed." The officers quickly took control of the situation, handcuffing the robber while Caleb stepped back. His arm throbbed, blood staining his uniform sleeve. Margaret Holloway stood nearby, clutching her recovered purse like a lifeline as she gave her statement to a detective. "Sir, we need your statement as well." An officer approached Caleb. "And you should have that arm looked at." Caleb nodded, recounting the events with military precision while a paramedic cleaned and bandaged his wound. Through it all, he could feel Margaret Holloway's gaze on him, filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, perhaps curiosity or concern. As the police finished processing the scene, Margaret approached him. "I don't know how to thank you." she said softly. What you did was incredibly brave. Anyone would have done the same, ma'am, Caleb replied, wincing slightly as he tested his bandaged arm. No, she shook her head. They wouldn't have. Please, let me— It's all right, Caleb interrupted gently. I'm just glad you're safe. I should head home now. My shift ended 20 minutes ago. He turned away before she could protest, limping slightly from where he'd hit the floor during the struggle. The night air felt cool against his face as he stepped outside, the adrenaline finally wearing off. His arm ached, and he knew Grace would worry when she saw the bandage, but he'd deal with that tomorrow. For now, all he wanted was to get home and rest. The police had his contact information if they needed anything else, and the security cameras would back up his statement. He'd done what needed to be done, nothing more, nothing less. As he walked to his car, the wail of a departing police siren pierced the night. Behind him, Margaret Holloway watched his departure, her expression thoughtful in the flashing lights. Morning sunlight filtered through the worn curtains of the Turner kitchen, casting warm patches across the scratched wooden table. The gentle sizzle of butter on the griddle filled the small space as Grace carefully poured pancake batter into perfect circles, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Dad, they're almost ready," she called out, her voice bright with determination. "And I didn't burn a single one this time." Caleb emerged from the bathroom, his arm freshly bandaged. The cut from last night wasn't deep, but it stung enough to remind him of everything that had happened. He couldn't help but smile at the sight of his daughter standing on her tiptoes to reach the cabinet where they kept the syrup. "Smells amazing, sweetheart," he said, easing himself into a kitchen chair. His muscles ached from the confrontation, making him feel twice his age. Grace placed a stack of golden brown pancakes in front of him, beaming with pride. "I used Mom's recipe," she said softly, touching the worn recipe card propped against the sugar bowl. She always said pancakes could fix anything. Caleb's throat tightened as he looked at his daughter's handiwork. The pancakes were a little lopsided, but they were made with such love it didn't matter. "Your mom was right about a lot of things," he managed, picking up his fork. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Grace spoke again. "Everyone at school's probably going to be talking about what happened. Mike's son Bobby already texted me about it." Caleb paused mid-bite. "I didn't do anything special, Grace, just what needed to be done." "But you're a hero, Dad. You saved that lady's life." Grace's eyes shone with admiration. "I'm no hero," Caleb said quietly, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Just trying to set a good example for my girl." The morning passed quickly as they cleaned up breakfast and Grace headed off to school. Caleb tried to get some sleep, but his phone kept buzzing with messages from coworkers. Around noon, it rang with a call from his manager, Jerry Wilson. "Turner, need you to come in early today. My office, 3 o'clock sharp." Caleb's stomach tightened at Jerry's clipped tone, but he kept his voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'll be there." The drive to work felt longer than usual. The convenience store's familiar red and white sign looked different in the harsh afternoon light. Caleb parked his old pickup truck in his usual spot, straightened his uniform, and walked inside. Jerry's office was a cramped space behind the store's stockroom, decorated with faded motivational posters and a dusty plastic plant. The manager sat behind his metal desk, hands folded over a manila folder. "Sit down, Turner," Jerry said, not meeting Caleb's eyes. Caleb lowered himself into the hard plastic chair, his back straight, hands resting on his knees, the same way he'd sat during military briefings years ago. "Corporate's been calling all morning." Jerry began shuffling papers. "That incident last night? It's all over social media. Local news picked it up too." "Sir, Jerry held up a hand. "Let me finish. You left your post. Engaged in a dangerous situation without authorization. Could have gotten yourself or others killed." "There was a woman in danger," Caleb said quietly. "I couldn't just stand by and watch." "That's not your job, Turner. Your job was to guard our store, our property." Jerry's voice grew harder. "Instead, you brought unwanted attention to this business, made us liable. What if you'd gotten hurt worse? What if the robber had sued?" Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "So I should have let her get hurt instead?" "Don't twist this around. This is about protocols, procedures, insurance liability." Jerry pulled a form from the folder. "I'm sorry, but effective immediately, your employment here is terminated." The words hung in the air, like smoke. Caleb sat very still, thinking of Grace, of bills, of promises made. "You'll receive your final paycheck next Friday." Jerry continued, pushing the form across the desk. Please clean out your locker and return your uniform by the end of the week. Caleb signed the paper without reading it. His hands didn't shake. They never did, but something cold settled in his chest. Jerry handed him a small cardboard box from beside the desk. For your things. The walk to his locker felt like miles. Caleb methodically emptied the metal compartment, a spare shirt, his lunch container, a photo of Grace at her last birthday, the small Bible his wife had given him before she passed. Each item went into the box with military precision. Outside, a light drizzle had started to fall, dotting the pavement with dark spots. Caleb stood for a moment under the store's awning, box in his arms, watching his reflection waver in a growing puddle. The image fractured and reformed with each falling drop, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. The evening shadows stretched across the kitchen as Caleb sat at the worn wooden table, surrounded by a scattered array of envelopes. Each bill seemed to carry more weight than the last. The electric bill peeked out from beneath the water bill, both stamped with bold red past due notices. His callous fingers traced the edges of each paper as he sorted them into piles. Urgent, very urgent, and desperately urgent. Grace sat at the other end of the table, her math textbook open and her pencil tapping rhythmically against her notebook. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment, mixing with the soft hum of their aging refrigerator. Every few minutes, she would glance up at her father, watching as his forehead creased with each new calculation. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, its methodical sound marking time as Caleb jotted down numbers on a notepad, crossing out and rewriting figures as he tried to make them add up differently. The bandage on his arm caught on the edge of an envelope, and he winced slightly, drawing Grace's attention. "Dad?" she asked, setting down her pencil. "Are you okay?" Caleb looked up, quickly smoothing his expression into a reassuring smile. "Just working on our monthly budget, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Grace closed her textbook and pushed it aside. "I heard you on the phone earlier, about losing your job." Her voice was steady, mature beyond her years. "We'll figure it out, Dad. We always do." The simple faith in her words made Caleb's throat tighten. She sounded so much like her mother in that moment. The same quiet strength, the same unwavering belief that everything would work out. "That's right, we will," he agreed, gathering the bills into a neat stack. "I've already got some leads for new security positions. First thing tomorrow morning, I'll start making calls." Grace stood up and walked around the table, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind. "Remember what you always tell me? God doesn't give us more than we can handle." Caleb reached up and squeezed her arm, marveling at how his daughter had grown into such a thoughtful young woman. "When did you get so wise, "I learned from the best," she said, resting her chin on his shoulder. Her eyes fell on the bills, and she pointed to one of them. "I can skip the art class at school. That'll save some money." "No, absolutely not." Caleb turned in his chair to face her. "Your art is important, Grace. We're not going to let this situation take away the things that matter." "But no buts," he said firmly. "You keep creating your beautiful drawings. That's your job. My job is to handle the grown-up stuff." Grace studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but promise you'll tell me if things get really bad?" "I promise," he said, knowing he'd do everything in his power to make sure that day never came. "Now, how about that math homework? Need any help?" She returned to her seat, pulling her textbook back. "I'm almost done. Just 2 more problems about triangles that don't want to cooperate." They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Grace with her geometry and Caleb with his calculations. The streetlights flickered on outside their window, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. A car horn honked in the distance, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at the moon. When the clock struck 9, Grace gathered her books. "I think I'm going to head to bed, Dad. Early day tomorrow." "Good idea. Don't forget to brush your teeth." She rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I'm 14, Dad." "I know the drill." After giving him a quick hug, Grace disappeared down the short hallway to her room. Caleb listened to the familiar sounds of her nighttime routine. Water running in the bathroom, the creak of her bedroom door, the soft padding of her feet on the carpet. Once he heard her door click shut, Caleb moved to the living room. The old couch creaked as he knelt beside it, his hands clasped together. The moonlight streaming through the window cast a soft glow around him as he bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I need your guidance. Show me the path forward. Not for my sake, but for Grace's." She deserves so much more than I can give her right now." His words caught in his throat as he continued, "Help me be the father she needs. The father Sarah would want me to be." He remained there, on his knees, letting the quiet of the night envelope him as he prayed for direction, for wisdom, for the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of Caleb's small apartment, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. He sat at the kitchen counter, his hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the bitter aroma helping to chase away his fatigue. The local morning news droned quietly from the old TV in the corner background noise until a familiar scene caught his attention. In local news, an attempted robbery at Evergreen Groceries was thwarted by an off-duty security guard, the reporter announced. Caleb leaned forward, turning up the volume. Grainy security footage showed the black SUV he'd noticed that night, followed by scenes of police cars with flashing lights. The intended victim was Margaret Holloway, widow of industrial magnate Richard Holloway and one of Cedar Falls' most prominent philanthropists. The screen switched to an archive photo of an elegant woman in her early 60s, silver hair swept into a sophisticated updo, accepting an award at some charity gala. Caleb's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. The woman from the store, the one he'd protected, was Margaret Holloway? He'd heard of her, of course. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew the Holloway name. The family's company employed half the town, and their charitable foundation had built the local children's hospital. Mrs. Holloway was unharmed in the incident, the reporter continued. Police have apprehended one suspect and are searching for a second who fled the scene. The security guard, whose name has not been released, sustained minor injuries. Grace emerged from her bedroom, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine, sweetheart," he managed, still staring at the TV. "Just surprised." "That woman I helped at the store? Turns out she's Margaret Holloway." Grace's eyes widened. "The Margaret Holloway? The one who donated the new computer lab to my school?" "The very same." Caleb shook his head, still processing the revelation. He'd risked his life to save one of the wealthiest people in the state, and he hadn't even known it. Not that it would have made any difference. He'd have done the same for anyone in danger. "That's amazing," Grace exclaimed, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "Maybe she'll—" A sharp knock at the door interrupted her. Caleb exchanged glances with Grace before crossing to answer it. Through the peephole, he saw a man in a crisp black uniform standing in the hallway. When he opened the door, the man offered a polite bow. "Mr. Turner? I'm James, Mrs. Holloway's chauffeur. She asked me to deliver this to you personally." He extended a cream-colored envelope, heavy paper embossed with a subtle H monogram. Caleb accepted it with uncertainty. "Thank you." "The car will wait, sir, should you wish to respond," James added, gesturing to a sleek black town car parked outside their building, easily the most expensive vehicle that had ever graced their modest apartment complex. Back inside, Grace bounced on her toes. "Open it, Dad." With careful fingers, Caleb broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten note on matching cream stationery. "Dear Mr. Turner, I hope this letter finds you well. I deeply regret that our first meeting occurred under such distressing circumstances, and I haven't properly expressed my gratitude for your brave intervention that night. I would be honored if you would join me for tea this afternoon at 2 o'clock at Holloway Estate. My driver James will be happy to provide transportation. With sincere appreciation, Margaret Holloway." Grace read over his shoulder, her excitement practically radiating. "Dad, you have to go." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, uncertainty gnawing at him. The Holloway estate sat high on Cedar Hills, its manicured grounds visible from half the town. What business did he have in a place like that? "I don't know, Grace. I'm supposed to be job hunting today. Dad." Grace fixed him with the stern look she'd inherited from her mother. "You got fired for doing the right thing. Maybe this is God's way of opening a new door for us." Caleb studied his daughter's face, so young, yet sometimes so wise. She had their mother's faith, that unshakable belief that everything happened for a reason. Looking down at the elegant invitation in his work-worn hands, he felt a flutter of something, hope, maybe? He stepped back to the door where James waited patiently. "Please tell Mrs. Holloway I would be honored to accept her invitation." "Very good, sir. I'll return at 1:30 to collect you." As Caleb closed the door, Grace threw her arms around him in a quick hug. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise, Dad." Looking at his daughter's bright smile, Caleb felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a bit. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the answer to last night's prayers, coming in a most unexpected form. The iron gates of the Holloway estate parted silently as Caleb's old pickup truck rumbled up the winding driveway. Pristine gardens stretched in every direction, dotted with marble fountains and carefully trimmed topiaries. The afternoon sun caught the spray of water, creating tiny rainbows that danced in the air. Caleb parked beside a row of luxury cars that made his truck look even more out of place. He smoothed down his best button-down shirt, the one Grace had ironed that morning, and checked his reflection in the side mirror. A small cut above his eyebrow from the robbery reminded him why he was here. The mansion loomed before him, its limestone facade gleaming. Caleb climbed the wide steps, each footfall echoing against the marble. Before he could reach for the brass knocker, the heavy door swung open. A butler in an impeccable suit greeted him with a slight bow. "Mr. Turner, welcome. Mrs. Holloway is expecting you in the conservatory. Please, follow me." They walked through high-ceilinged corridors lined with oil paintings and antiques that probably cost more than his yearly salary. Caleb's work boots felt heavy on the plush carpets. The butler led him to a sun-filled room where glass walls showcased the gardens. Tropical plants created a peaceful sanctuary, and comfortable wicker furniture invited relaxation. Margaret Holloway stood as he entered. She was tall and graceful, dressed simply but elegantly in a pale blue dress. Her silver hair was swept back in a neat chignon, and her eyes, kind but carrying a hint of sadness, studied him carefully. "Mr. Turner," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Please, join me for tea." "Mrs. Holloway," Caleb replied, shaking her hand gently. "Thank you for having me. James, the tea service, please," Margaret instructed the butler, who nodded and disappeared silently. They sat across from each other, sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling. Margaret's posture was perfect, but there was something approachable about her presence that put Caleb slightly more at ease. "First," she began, "I want to thank you properly for what you did at the store. You saved my life, Mr. Turner." Caleb shifted in his seat. "Anyone would have done the same, ma'am." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I saw several people run away that night, but you ran toward danger to help a stranger." James returned with a silver tea service, setting it on the table between them. The familiar ritual of pouring tea filled the momentary silence. "I understand you lost your job because of what happened," Margaret continued, adding a sugar cube to her cup. "Yes, ma'am, but I don't regret what I did." Margaret's eyes softened. "Of course you don't. That's precisely why I asked you here today." She reached for her handbag and withdrew an envelope. "I'd like to offer you a reward for your bravery." Caleb raised his hand before she could extend the envelope. "I appreciate the gesture, Mrs. Holloway, but I can't accept that." "May I ask, why not?" "Because helping others isn't something that needs a reward. My wife," he paused, swallowing hard. "My late wife always said that doing the right thing is its own reward." Margaret set the envelope down, her expression changing. "You lost your wife?" "5 years ago, cancer." Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. "Left me and my daughter Grace to figure things out on our own." Margaret nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "Richard, my husband passed away 10 years ago. Heart attack, no warning." She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. "Some days it feels like yesterday." "The hard days never really go away, do they?" "No," Margaret agreed softly. "They just become different." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood the weight of absence. Outside, birds sang in the garden, and a gentle breeze rustled through the conservatory plants. "Tell me about your daughter," Margaret said at last. Caleb's face brightened. "Grace is 14, smart as a whip, just like her mother. Works hard at school, never complains about our situation. Sometimes I think she's the one taking care of me." "Children have a way of giving us strength we didn't know we had," Margaret observed. "That they do." They talked a while longer, the conversation flowing naturally. Margaret shared stories about her grandson, and Caleb spoke about his military service. The afternoon light began to soften, and James appeared to remind Margaret of her next appointment. "I should go," Caleb said, standing. "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Holloway." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Turner." She walked with him to the conservatory door. "And please, think about the reward. You've lost your job because of me. Let me make that right." Caleb shook his head gently. "Some things are worth more than money, ma'am." "I appreciate the offer, but I'll find another job." James escorted him back through the mansion. As Caleb's truck disappeared down the driveway, Margaret watched from a window in her study, lost in thought. "He's not like the others, ma'am," James observed quietly. Margaret's reply was barely above a whisper. "No, he isn't." The phone's ring pierced the quiet morning air of Caleb's apartment. He'd been searching through job listings online, circling potential opportunities in the local newspaper. Grace sat at the kitchen table, finishing her math homework before school. "Hello?" Caleb answered, expecting another rejection from his job applications. "Mr. Turner?" A crisp, professional voice responded. "This is Jennifer Carlton from Mrs. Holloway's office. Mrs. Holloway would like to offer you a temporary position as her driver and security escort." Caleb's hand tightened around the phone. He glanced at Grace, who looked up curiously from her textbook. I'm not sure I understand," he said carefully. "Mrs. Holloway was impressed by your character and background. The position would include driving her to appointments and events, plus providing security during her public appearances. Would you be interested in discussing the details?" Caleb's eyes drifted to the stack of bills on the counter. Grace's school fees notice sat on top, marked "Final Notice" in bold red letters. "Yes," he said finally, "I would." After arranging a meeting time, Caleb hung up and told Grace about the offer. Her face lit up with excitement. "Dad, this is perfect." She jumped up from her chair. "Wait here, I know exactly what you need." She disappeared into his bedroom and returned with 3 ties laid across her arms like precious artifacts. "These were Mom's favorites on you," she said softly, arranging them on the table. "The blue one brings out your eyes, but the burgundy one looks more professional." Caleb touched the ties gently. His wife had given him the burgundy one for their last anniversary together. "The burgundy one it is," he said, managing a smile. The next morning, Caleb reported to the Holloway estate, dressed in his best suit. The burgundy tie knotted perfectly thanks to Grace's careful adjustments. Mrs. Holloway's assistant, Jennifer, gave him a tour of the grounds and reviewed his duties. "Mrs. Holloway prefers punctuality above all else," Jennifer explained, handing him a schedule. "She has specific routes she likes taken to avoid traffic. The car must be cleaned daily, and the temperature should always be set to 72 degrees. Caleb nodded, mentally noting each detail. His military training had taught him the importance of precision and protocol. The first few days passed smoothly. Caleb learned Margaret's preferences quickly, how she liked classical music playing softly during morning drives, her preference for taking the scenic route past the lake on return trips, the way she appreciated quiet reflection rather than small talk. On Wednesday, Margaret asked him to run a personal errand, picking up a special order of books from her favorite bookstore. "I trust your discretion, Mr. Turner," she said, handing him a sealed envelope. "These are rather personal selections." Caleb handled the task with characteristic care, earning a genuine smile of appreciation from Margaret when he returned with the carefully wrapped package. But not everyone shared Margaret's growing trust in him. Caleb noticed the sideways glances from other staff members, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. One morning, he overheard 2 gardeners talking near the garage. "Betty's just waiting for the right moment to ask for money," one said. "They all do eventually." "Did you see how fast he got close to her? Suspicious if you ask me," the other replied. Caleb kept his head high and focused on his work, remembering what he taught Grace about dignity in the face of judgment. By Friday afternoon, Caleb had settled into a routine. He was washing the car while waiting for Margaret's last appointment to end when Grace called, her voice shaking. "Dad, have you seen the newspaper?" Caleb's stomach tightened. "No, honey. What's wrong?" "Someone at school showed me an article. It's not good, Dad." He found a copy of the local paper in the break room. The headline made his blood run cold. "Reckless, Vigilante, or Hero? Questions arise about store incident." The article painted him as an attention-seeking troublemaker who had endangered civilians by intervening in the robbery. Sources close to the situation suggest Turner's actions may have escalated a situation that trained professionals could have handled more safely, the article read. His subsequent employment by Mrs. Holloway raises questions about possible ulterior motives. Grace's voice trembled over the phone. "Some kids at school were saying mean things. They said you only helped Mrs. Holloway to get her money." Caleb's fingers crumpled the newspaper's edges. Everything he'd taught Grace about doing the right thing, about standing tall in the face of adversity, it all felt hollow in that moment. His daughter was suffering because he'd tried to help someone in need. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We know the truth. That's what matters." "I know, Dad." Grace tried to sound brave, but he could hear the hurt in her voice. I wish they knew you like I do." After hanging up, Caleb stood in the break room, the crumpled newspaper in his hands. The words blurred before his eyes as memories of that night flooded back: the sound of breaking glass, the woman's terrified scream, his instinctive response to protect someone in danger. He hadn't thought about consequences or reputation. He'd simply done what he believed was right. Now, staring at the twisted version of events in black and white, Caleb felt the weight of public judgment pressing down on his shoulders. His decision to help Margaret that night had seemed so clear, so simple. But nothing was simple anymore. His daughter was being teased at school, his integrity was being questioned, and Margaret's reputation could be at risk simply for giving him a chance. The newspaper lay crushed in his grip as he faced the hardest question of all. Had doing the right thing been worth the cost? The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Holloway Estate as Caleb guided the sleek black Mercedes through the winding driveway. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel a bit tighter than usual, noticing the cluster of reporters gathered near the front gates. Their cameras hung ready, like weapons poised to strike. In the back seat, Margaret Holloway reviewed documents for the upcoming charity board meeting, her silver reading glasses perched delicately on her nose. She glanced up as the car slowed, noticing the crowd ahead. "They're persistent, aren't they?" she said softly, a hint of weariness in her voice. "Would you prefer I take the service entrance, Mrs. Holloway?" Caleb asked, already starting to turn the wheel. "No." Margaret straightened her spine, tucking the papers into her leather portfolio. "We have nothing to hide, Mr. Turner. Please proceed as normal." Camera flashes erupted as Caleb eased the car through the gates. Questions pelted the vehicle like hail. "Mrs. Holloway, why hire an untrained security guard?" "Mr. Turner, what are your real intentions with the widow? Is it true you endangered civilians during the robbery?" Caleb kept his eyes forward, face neutral, just as he'd learned in the military. Margaret sat equally composed, her elegant gray suit and pearl necklace a stark contrast to the chaos outside. At the main entrance of the Holloway Foundation building, Caleb opened Margaret's door, shielding her from the cameras with his broad shoulders. A reporter thrust a microphone toward them. "Mrs. Holloway, do you feel safe with a man who took the law into his own hands?" Margaret paused, turning to face the crowd. Her voice carried clearly across the marble steps. "I feel safer with a man of principle than with 100 men of mere procedure." Inside the building's austere lobby, Margaret's heels clicked against polished floors as Caleb followed at a respectful distance. Board members in expensive suits clustered near the elevator, their conversations dropping to whispers as Margaret approached. "Margaret, darling." A woman in her 60s air-kissed Margaret's cheeks. "We were just discussing the unusual publicity lately." Her eyes flicked dismissively toward Caleb. "Were you, Eleanor?" Margaret's smile remained pleasant. "Then you must be pleased our foundation is receiving attention for actual acts of courage rather than just our usual galas." The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt longer than usual. Caleb stood in the corner, aware of the sidelong glances and subtle shifting of bodies away from him. One board member ostentatiously checked his wallet was still in place. The boardroom stretched out in mahogany and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city. Caleb took his position near the door as the meeting began. He noticed Andrew Holloway, Margaret's son, enter late, his expensive suit slightly rumpled and face flushed with barely contained anger. "Mother," Andrew interrupted the financial report. "A word in private?" Margaret didn't look up from her notes. "Anything you need to say can be said here, Andrew." Andrew's jaw clenched. "Fine. Then let's discuss the liability issues of having an unvetted employee with access to sensitive information, not to mention the PR nightmare of associating with someone the press is calling a vigilante." The room grew still. Caleb remained at attention, his face betraying nothing despite the heat rising in his chest. "Mr. Turner," Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Would you please share your military service record with the board?" "Yes, ma'am. 8 years active duty, Special Forces. 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge as Staff Sergeant. And your security clearance level? Top secret, ma'am, still active." Margaret turned to Andrew, her voice gentle but firm. As for vetting, son, Mr. Turner has undergone more background checks than anyone else in this room. Now, shall we return to discussing the children's hospital wing? Andrew's face reddened further, but he sat down, shooting Caleb a venomous look. The meeting proceeded, though Caleb could feel the undercurrent of tension. He focused on his duty, scanning for threats, monitoring exits, anything to avoid dwelling on the whispers and stares. Hours later, as evening settled over the city, Caleb drove Margaret home. The paparazzi had thinned but hadn't disappeared entirely. Inside the estate's library, Margaret poured 2 cups of tea, something she'd begun doing despite Caleb's initial protests about maintaining professional boundaries. "You handled yourself well today?" she said, passing him a delicate china cup. "I've faced worse than boardroom politics, ma'am." Margaret smiled, settling into her favorite armchair. "Sometimes integrity needs a voice, Mr. Turner. Without someone willing to speak for it, principle becomes merely an idea rather than a living force." Caleb stared into his tea, thinking of Grace, of bills piling up, of whispers that could destroy his chances of future employment. "And sometimes," he replied quietly, "that voice costs everything." Margaret studied him thoughtfully, the lamplight catching the silver in her hair. Saturday morning sunlight filtered through the worn curtains of the Turner apartment, catching dust motes that danced in the air. Grace sat cross-legged on their faded blue couch, sketching in her notebook while soft gospel music played from a small radio in the kitchen. The apartment was modest but immaculately clean, with family photos covering one wall and a well-loved Bible on the coffee table. A gentle knock at the door made Grace look up from her drawing. She carefully set aside her sketchbook and straightened her simple cotton dress before answering. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. Margaret Holloway stood there, elegant even in casual weekend attire, a pale blue sweater and tailored pants. In her hands, she held a leather-bound book. "Hello," she said warmly. "You must be Grace. I'm Margaret Holloway." Grace's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, yes, ma'am. Dad's told me about you. Please come in." She stepped aside, gesturing with natural grace that belied her 14 years. Margaret entered, taking in the small but tidy living room. "Your father left this book in my car yesterday," she explained, holding up the volume. "I thought I'd return it personally." "Dad's at the store getting groceries," Grace said, "but he should be back soon. Would you like some tea while you wait?" "I just made a fresh pot." Margaret's eyes softened at the girl's politeness. "That would be lovely, thank you." Grace moved to the kitchen with quiet efficiency, returning moments later with 2 mismatched teacups on their best serving tray, a yard sale find her father had restored. "We only have chamomile. I hope that's okay." "Chamomile is perfect." Margaret settled onto the couch, noticing Grace's open sketchbook. "Do you draw?" Grace nodded, carefully pouring the tea. "Yes, ma'am. Mom taught me before she passed. Dad says I got her artistic talent." Margaret picked up the teacup, noting the chip on its rim that had been carefully smoothed down. "May I see some of your work?" Grace hesitated only briefly before picking up her sketchbook. She flipped through several pages of detailed drawings, landscapes, animals, and portraits. "These are just practice pieces," she said modestly. "They're beautiful," Margaret said, genuine admiration in her voice. She paused at a sketch of a man reading, "Clearly Caleb," captured in quiet moments of contemplation. The detail was remarkable, down to the worry lines around his eyes. "Dad works so hard," Grace said quietly, following Margaret's gaze. "He thinks I don't notice when he skips meals so I can have enough. Or when he stays up late counting pennies for bills." She straightened her shoulders. "But I'm going to help as soon as I can. I'm learning to design websites from YouTube videos. Maybe I can earn some money that way." Margaret felt her throat tighten. Here was this child, carrying adult concerns with such dignity. "Your father is very proud of you," she said softly. Grace nodded, then suddenly brightened. "Would you like to see my favorite drawing?" "I'd love to." Grace flipped to a fresh page and began sketching quickly, her pencil moving with surprising confidence. Margaret watched, sipping her tea as shapes emerged, a heart surrounded by delicate angel wings. "Mom used to say that angels watch over us," Grace explained as she worked. "When things get hard, I draw these to remember she's still watching too." She carefully tore the page from her sketchbook and held it out to Margaret. "I want you to have this one." Margaret took the drawing with trembling hands. The simple image carried such weight of meaning. Love, loss, hope, and resilience, all captured in a few pencil strokes. "Grace, "This is Precious. Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am." Grace smiled, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Dad says you've had hard times too, even though you have money. Sometimes people forget that everybody hurts, no matter who they are." Margaret stared at the drawing, emotion welling in her chest. This child, who had every reason to be bitter about life's unfairness, instead offered comfort to others. She saw now why Caleb remained so strong despite their struggles. He had this bright spirit to come home to. "Mrs. Holloway?" Grace's voice was hesitant. "Will you help my dad? Not with money," she added quickly. "He wouldn't want that, but maybe. Just let him know it's okay to accept help sometimes. He tries to carry everything alone." Margaret reached out and squeezed Grace's hand. "I promise," she whispered. The sound of keys in the door made them both look up. Before Caleb could enter, Margaret stood, clutching the drawing to her chest. "I should go," she said softly. "Thank you for the tea, Grace, and for this." She touched the drawing gently. Tears threatened to spill as she walked to the door, passing Caleb, who stood surprised in the entrance with his grocery bags. The drawing, pressed against her heart, felt like a talisman of hope, a reminder that even in life's darkest moments, grace could be found in unexpected places. Monday dawned crisp and clear, with autumn leaves dancing across the Holloway Estate's circular driveway, like golden confetti scattered by an invisible hand. The morning air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter's approach. Caleb stood by the black town car, his uniform pressed to perfection and shoes shined to military precision that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. He'd arrived 30 minutes early, as always, methodically checking the vehicle's fluid levels, tire pressure, and GPS route one final time. The habits of a soldier never truly left him. Preparation meant survival, whether in combat or civilian life. Margaret emerged from the mansion's grand doors like royalty from a palace, wearing a navy blue blazer that complemented her silver hair and a strand of pearls that caught the morning light like dewdrops. Her silver hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, and she carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who had attended countless formal events. Yet Caleb noticed something different these days. Her steps were lighter, less burdened, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Good morning, Caleb," she said warmly, her voice carrying genuine affection rather than mere politeness. "Ready for our visit to the Veterans Center?" "Yes, ma'am." He opened the car door for her with the same careful attention he'd given to everything since entering her service. "Traffic should be light this time of day. I've mapped out 2 alternate routes, just in case." As they glided through the city streets in the quiet luxury of the town car, Margaret sorted through papers in her supple leather portfolio, occasionally making notes in the margins with a gold pen. The documents were covered with statistics and budget projections, but her expression remained focused and determined. "The new program will help veterans transition back to civilian life," she explained, looking up from her paperwork. "Job training, counseling, family support services, everything I wish Richard had access to when he came home from his deployment overseas all those years ago." Caleb nodded slowly, his hand steady on the steering wheel as memories of his own difficult transition flickered through his mind like old photographs. The sleepless nights, the hypervigilance that made grocery shopping feel like a patrol mission, the way civilian problems seemed both trivial and overwhelming at once. "It makes a real difference, having someone understand what you've been through," he said quietly. "Someone who knows that coming home isn't always the end of the battle." The Veterans Support Center occupied a sturdy old brick building in the heart of downtown, its weathered facade speaking of decades of faithful service to those who had served their country. The building's bones were solid, built in an era when things were made to last, but fresh coats of forest green paint on the window trim and a new sign out front hinted at renewal and hope. American flags flanked the entrance, snapping smartly in the autumn breeze. As Caleb helped Margaret from the car, adjusting his jacket with military precision, a small group of staff members waited at the entrance. Their faces were a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. It wasn't every day that someone of Margaret Holloway's stature visited their modest facility. Inside, the center buzzed with quiet activity. The director, Tom Wheeler, a graying man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who understood his mission, led them through hallways that echoed with the sounds of second chances being built. Voices drifted from various rooms, animated discussions from support groups where men and women shared their struggles and victories, the focused concentration of job training classes. where new skills were being learned, and the softer tones of counseling sessions where healing happened one conversation at a time. Margaret listened with the intensity of someone genuinely invested in understanding, asking thoughtful questions about funding gaps, success rates, and the specific challenges that kept her hosts awake at night. She took notes constantly, her pen moving across her leather-bound notebook as she captured not just facts and figures, but the human stories behind them. In the center's main meeting room, a space that had clearly seen better days but radiated warmth despite its worn carpeting and mismatched chairs, about 30 people had gathered. Veterans from different eras sat alongside family members whose faces showed the strain of supporting loved ones through invisible wounds. Staff members stood along the walls, their expressions hopeful. Margaret approached the small podium with the confidence of someone accustomed to addressing crowds. Yet there was something more personal in her demeanor today. Her voice was clear and steady as she announced the details of the new program and its generous funding, but she spoke as if addressing friends rather than delivering a formal presentation. "And now," she said, turning toward Caleb with a smile that held just a hint of mischief, "I'd like to invite someone special to speak. Someone who understands firsthand what many of you are experiencing." Her eyes found his across the room. "Caleb?" The surprise hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of all those expectant eyes upon him. Then his military training kicked in when called upon. "You step forward." He walked to the podium with measured steps, his bearing automatically shifting into the confident posture that had once commanded respect from younger soldiers under his charge. The room fell into the kind of respectful quiet that only veterans truly understood, not empty silence, but attentive stillness. Looking out at the faces before him, Caleb saw reflections of his own journey. Young veterans with eyes that had seen too much, too soon. Older ones with weathered expressions that spoke of battles both foreign and domestic. Spouses whose own service had been measured in sleepless nights and worried prayers. "I'm not one for speeches," he began, his voice low but carrying easily through the room with the authority of someone who had once given orders that meant life or death. "But I know what it's like to come home and feel like you're still fighting battles, different ones, quieter ones, maybe, but just as real." He paused, his weathered hands gripping the podium's edges as he chose his words with the same care he'd once used to navigate minefields. "When my wife passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving me alone with our daughter, I thought I'd failed at the most important mission of my life, protecting my family." A few heads nodded in understanding throughout the room, creating a silent chorus of shared experience. Caleb drew strength from that recognition, from the knowledge that his words were landing on ears that truly understood. "But what the military taught me about brotherhood, about having each other's backs no matter what, that matters here too. We're still a unit, just a different kind. Civilian casualties instead of combat losses. But we still don't leave anyone behind." He gestured toward the room around them, encompassing not just the building, but everything it represented. "Programs like this, they're our supply lines, our reinforcements, our way of saying that no one has to fight alone, whether the enemy is PTSD, unemployment, or just trying to figure out how to be a father when everything you thought you knew about yourself got left on some battlefield halfway around the world." When he finished, the silence held for a long moment, not uncomfortable, but reverent. Then applause filled the room, warm and genuine, led by Margaret, whose eyes shone with pride and something deeper. Several veterans approached afterward, each carrying their own story to share. Handshakes turned into conversations, conversations into connections, and Caleb found himself surrounded by men and women who spoke his language in ways that had nothing to do with words. Margaret watched from nearby, taking notes not on program details but on the organic community that was forming around her companion. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and more than once she had to pause in her writing to compose herself as she witnessed the healing power of shared understanding. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meaningful conversations and unexpected connections. Caleb discovered himself drawn into discussions about everything from job searches to parenting challenges, from managing nightmares to finding purpose in civilian life. He noticed Margaret moving through the crowd with renewed energy, her formal demeanor giving way to genuine warmth as she spoke with family members about their needs and hopes. Her notebook filled with personal stories rather than statistics, and her initial funding commitment grew with each conversation. By late afternoon, as golden sunlight slanted through the center's windows and the day's programming wound down, the building hummed with an energy that hadn't been there that morning. Plans were already forming for new support groups and family events. Margaret had not only doubled her initial funding offer, but had also committed to quarterly visits and ongoing consultation with the staff. The drive home took them through the heart of downtown as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in warm golds and dusty pinks that reflected off the glass windows of office buildings. Traffic moved slowly through the business district, but neither passenger nor driver seemed to mind the leisurely pace. The day's events had created a comfortable silence between them, not the absence of conversation, but the presence of understanding. "You surprised me today," Margaret said finally, her voice soft with something that might have been wonder. "The way you spoke to them, so honest, so understanding. You didn't just talk about service. You made them feel that their struggles mattered." She looked out the window at the passing cityscape, lost in thought for a moment as memories of another man in uniform flickered across her mind. "You remind me of the man my husband used to be, before the business consumed him. Before he forgot that the greatest victories aren't measured in dollars, but in lives touched." The autumn chill had settled over Cedar Falls, but the heat of gossip burned through the city's elite social circles. At the Meadowbrook Country Club, where Margaret occasionally attended board meetings, hushed conversations died when she entered rooms. Sideways glances and barely concealed smirks followed her movements. "Did you see the way he looks at her?" One society matron whispered behind her crystal glass of Chardonnay. "A widow her age, and that driver of hers." Another replied, shaking her head with mock concern. Margaret held her head high, ignoring the whispers. She'd weathered worse storms in her years as Richard's wife and then his widow, but this time felt different. The rumors threatened not just her reputation, but Caleb's integrity. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning. Margaret sat in her study, reviewing charitable foundation documents when her housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, hurried in with the morning's tabloid. "Ma'am, you need to see this," she said, her usually calm demeanor shaken. The front page showed a grainy but clear photo of Margaret and Caleb at last week's Veterans Benefit. In reality, he had been helping her up the stairs after she'd twisted her ankle. But the photo, taken from a particular angle, made it appear far more intimate. The headline screamed, "Widow's Secret Romance with Hired Help." Margaret's hands trembled as she read the article. It cited an anonymous source close to the family, claiming she and Caleb had been carrying on a clandestine relationship for months. The source was quoted saying, "She's changed since he arrived. The way they look at each other, it's inappropriate." She knew immediately who was behind it. James Whitman, her late husband's former business rival, had been trying to undermine the Holloway Foundation's influence for years. This was a new low, even for him. Before she could collect her thoughts, the study door burst open. Andrew stormed in, his face flushed with anger, clutching the same tabloid. "What is this?" he demanded, slapping the paper onto her desk. "Do you have any idea what this does to our family's reputation? To Father's legacy?" Margaret stood slowly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Andrew, you know better than to believe tabloid nonsense." "Nonsense?" He laughed bitterly. "The whole city is talking about it. Our shareholders are concerned. The foundation's donors are calling, asking questions. And you want to call it nonsense? Your father would be ashamed to see you believing such ridiculous accusations," Margaret said firmly. Andrew's face darkened. "Don't you dare bring Father into this. He'd be ashamed to see his widow carrying on with the help. Caleb Turner is a good man who has served this family with nothing but integrity," Margaret shot back, her composure cracking slightly. "He saved my life. Or have you forgotten that?" "Oh, he saved you all right," Andrew sneered. "Saved you and made himself indispensable. How convenient. A unemployed security guard suddenly becomes your personal driver, your constant companion. Did you think people wouldn't notice?" Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Turner is here for the morning drive, ma'am." The tension in the room thickened. Andrew strode to the door, pushing past Mrs. Chen. "I'll deal with this myself." "Andrew, don't you dare," Margaret called after him. But he was already halfway down the hall. Caleb stood by the car in his usual spot, checking his phone for messages from Grace. He looked up at the sound of angry footsteps on gravel. "Turner!" Andrew's voice cut through the morning quiet. He thrust the tabloid at Caleb's chest. "Care to explain this?" Caleb caught the paper, his face falling as he saw the photo. "Mister, Holloway, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you're taking advantage of a vulnerable widow, getting awful cozy with your employer, aren't you? Margaret appeared on the front steps, moving as quickly as her dignity would allow. That's enough, Andrew. But Andrew wasn't finished. You know what I think? I think you planned this from the beginning. The convenient rescue, the humble refusal of reward money, all so you could worm your way into her trust, into her life. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. I understand you're upset, sir, but I would never disrespect your mother or your father's memory that way. Save it. Andrew spat. I want you gone. Today. If you have any decency left, you'll resign before I have to fire you. Andrew. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. You have no authority to fire anyone. This is my household. But Caleb was already reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope. He'd written his resignation letter the night before, after first seeing the photo circulating online. He'd known it would come to this. Mrs. Holloway, he said quietly, extending the envelope to Margaret. I think it's best if I step down. Margaret stared at the envelope, hurt and betrayal flashing across her face. Caleb, no, you don't have to do this. Yes, ma'am, I do. His eyes met hers with quiet dignity. Your reputation means everything to your foundation's work. I won't be the reason that work suffers. Andrew smirked triumphantly. But Margaret wasn't done fighting. This is ridiculous. We can weather this storm. I won't let malicious gossip drive away a good man. Caleb shook his head gently. Sometimes doing the right thing means walking away, ma'am. My daughter taught me that. He placed the envelope in her reluctant hands. It's been an honor serving you, Mrs. Holloway. Before Margaret could protest further, Caleb turned and walked down the driveway. His shoulders were straight, his head high, every inch the soldier he'd once been. He didn't look back, though he could feel Margaret's eyes on him. Andrew watched him go with satisfaction. Good riddance. Margaret clutched the resignation letter, her voice thick with emotion. You're wrong about him, Andrew. So terribly wrong. She turned to go back inside, pausing only to add, and you're wrong about what your father would think. He would have seen Caleb's worth, just as I do. She climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of the envelope in her hands far heavier than its few pages should have been. Behind her, the sound of Caleb's footsteps faded away, taking with them the brief peace she'd found in his steady presence. The morning mist clung to the Holloway estate's manicured hedges as Caleb's old pickup truck rumbled up the circular driveway one last time. Grace sat quietly beside him, having insisted on coming along to say goodbye to Margaret. The magnificent house loomed before them, its stone facade somehow less welcoming than it had been just weeks ago. You don't have to do this, Dad, Grace said softly, her fingers playing with the friendship bracelet Margaret had given her last week. Caleb squeezed the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Sometimes doing the right thing hurts, sweetheart. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what makes it right. They climbed out of the truck, and Caleb retrieved his neatly pressed uniform jacket from the back seat. He'd spent an hour ironing it last night, determined to return it in perfect condition. Grace slipped her hand into his free one as they walked to the front door. Thompson, the butler, opened it before they could ring the bell. His usual stoic expression carried a hint of sadness. Mrs. Holloway is waiting in the library, he said, stepping aside to let them in. The house felt different today. The elegant furnishings and artwork that had once inspired awe now seemed to whisper accusations. Their footsteps echoed through the quiet halls until they reached the library door. Margaret stood by the window, her slim figure silhouetted against the morning light. She turned as they entered, and Caleb's heart clenched at the sight of her red-rimmed eyes. You don't need to do this, she said immediately, her voice wavering slightly. We can weather this storm together. Caleb stepped forward, carefully laying his uniform jacket across a leather armchair. Mrs. Holloway Margaret, she corrected automatically, then pressed her lips together as if the familiar exchange pained her. Margaret, he continued gently, you've shown me more kindness than I deserve, but I can't let these rumors damage your reputation or your family relationships. My reputation? She moved closer, her usual grace tinged with desperation. Do you think I care about what those vultures say? They've been circling me since Richard died, waiting for any excuse to tear me apart. Grace watched the exchange with wise eyes beyond her years, her presence a silent reminder of everything at stake. Your son, Caleb, started. Andrew is wrong about you, Margaret interrupted. He's angry and protective, but he'll see the truth eventually. The truth doesn't always matter in these situations, Caleb said softly. The damage is done the moment the whispers start. He straightened his shoulders, calling on every ounce of military discipline to keep his voice steady. I need to protect my daughter, and you need to protect your family's legacy. Grace stepped forward suddenly, her voice small but determined. But Mrs. Holloway is like family now too. Margaret's composure cracked at Grace's words. She crossed the room and pulled the girl into a tight hug. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. Caleb watched them, his throat tight. The past weeks had brought so much unexpected joy into their lives. Margaret had become more than an employer. She was a friend, a confidant, someone who understood the weight of loss and the courage it took to keep going. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion, for everything you've done for us, the job, the kindness, the way you've treated Grace. Please. Margaret tried one last time, releasing Grace but keeping an arm around her shoulders. We can find another way. Caleb shook his head. Sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. He managed a small smile. You taught me that, actually. That day at the Veterans Center, Margaret's shoulders slumped slightly, recognizing the quiet determination in his voice. It was the same tone he'd used when refusing her initial reward for saving her life. At least let me help you find another position, she said. Somewhere your integrity will be valued. I'll be fine, Caleb assured her, though they all knew jobs were scarce in Cedar Falls. We've weathered tough times before. Grace hugged Margaret once more, then returned to her father's side. The goodbye hung heavy in the air, weighted with words left unsaid and possibilities left unexplored. Thompson will show you out, Margaret said finally, her composure returning like a shield. Caleb nodded, taking Grace's hand. They turned to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped them at the door. Caleb? He looked back. You're a good man. Never doubt that. The walk down the hallway felt endless. Thompson opened the front door silently, and father and daughter stepped out into the gray morning. The air felt thick with approaching rain. As they walked down the long driveway, the first drops began to fall. Caleb didn't quicken his pace or reach for an umbrella. Each step away from the house felt like another weight added to his shoulders. Up in the library, Margaret stood at the window, one trembling hand pressed against the glass as she watched them go. The rain streaked down the window, matching the tears she finally allowed to fall. 2 days dragged by like heavy weights around Caleb's shoulders. The crisp autumn morning found him driving down Cedar Falls Main Street, running errands to keep his mind off recent events. His old pickup truck rattled past familiar storefronts, the radio quietly playing gospel music that did little to lift his spirits. As he approached the iron gates of the Holloway estate, his hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd taken this route hundreds of times as Margaret's driver, but now each landmark felt like a reminder of what he'd lost. The majestic oak trees lining the driveway swayed in the morning breeze, their leaves beginning to turn golden. A child's scream pierced the air. Caleb slammed on his brakes, tires screeching against asphalt. The sound came again, high-pitched, terrified, coming from inside the estate grounds. Without thinking, he threw his truck into park and jumped out, leaving the door wide open. The wrought iron gates were unlocked, unusual for this time of day. He sprinted through them, his military training kicking in as he followed the sounds of splashing and screaming. As he rounded the corner past the rose garden, he saw it. The ornamental pond, usually so peaceful, now churning with desperate movement. A small boy, Henry, Margaret's grandson, thrashed in the deep water, his little arms flailing wildly. "Hold on!" Caleb shouted, already running. He kicked off his shoes mid-stride, shrugging out of his jacket. The pond was at least 8 feet deep in the middle, surrounded by smooth stones that had grown slick with morning dew. He dove in without hesitation. The cold water shocked his system, but he pushed through it, powerful strokes carrying him to where Henry struggled. The boy's movements were becoming weaker, his head barely above water. Caleb reached him just as Henry started to sink. "I've got you," he said, wrapping one arm around the child's chest. Henry coughed and sputtered, clinging to Caleb's neck with desperate strength. "Grandmother!" Henry cried out between gasps. "I want my grandmother! Henry?" Margaret's voice rang out across the garden, filled with terror. She appeared at the edge of the pond, her usual composure shattered. Her face had gone pale, hands pressed against her mouth in horror. Caleb kicked strongly, keeping Henry's head well above water as he swam them both to the edge. The boy trembled violently, whether from cold or fear. Caleb couldn't tell, probably both. "Pass him to me," Margaret pleaded, reaching down with shaking hands. Caleb lifted Henry up, and Margaret pulled him into her arms, clutching him close. The boy buried his face in her neck, sobbing. "Shh, darling, you're safe now," Margaret whispered, rocking him gently. "You're safe." She looked at Caleb, who was pulling himself out of the pond, water streaming from his clothes. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank God you were here. Thank God." Shouts and running footsteps announced the arrival of estate staff. Someone draped a thick blanket around Henry, while another helped Caleb to his feet. He stood there dripping, suddenly aware of camera clicks and murmured voices beyond the garden wall. A small crowd had gathered at the estate gates, including several reporters who regularly staked out the property. Their cameras flashed rapidly, capturing the scene. Caleb Turner, soaking wet but standing tall. Margaret Holloway holding her trembling grandson. The peaceful pond that had nearly claimed a young life. "Mr. Turner," one reporter called out, "did you just save Henry Holloway? Is this why Mrs. Holloway trusted you as her driver? Were the previous allegations against you false?" Margaret's security team moved to block the photographers, but the damage, or perhaps the blessing, was already done. The truth would be impossible to hide now, and maybe that was for the best. Henry lifted his head from Margaret's shoulder, looking at Caleb with wide eyes. "You saved me," he said simply, his voice small but clear. Caleb smiled gently. "Anyone would have done the same, buddy." "No," Margaret said firmly, still holding Henry close. "Not anyone. You." She reached out with one hand and gripped Caleb's arm, her fingers trembling but her grip strong. "Always you." The morning sun broke through the clouds then, casting golden light across the garden. Water dripped from Caleb's clothes, forming small pools at his feet. In the distance, sirens announced the approach of emergency services, but here in this moment, time seemed to stand still. Henry reached out one small hand toward Caleb. "Thank you," he whispered. Before Caleb could respond, the paramedics arrived, rushing forward to check on Henry. They wrapped him in fresh blankets and began their examination while Margaret hovered nearby, unwilling to let her grandson out of her sight. Reporters continued calling questions from beyond the gates, their cameras capturing every detail of the scene. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves, but for once, they would tell a truth that couldn't be twisted. On this crisp autumn morning, a man who had been branded a vigilante had once again proven himself a hero. Sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting warm rectangles across the pediatric ward's cheerful blue walls. Caleb stood in the doorway of room 214, a small teddy bear tucked under his arm. Inside, 6-year-old Henry Holloway sat propped up against white pillows, his face lighting up at the sight of his visitor. "Mr. Caleb, you came!" Henry's voice cracked with excitement, his earlier ordeal forgotten in the joy of seeing his rescuer. Caleb's weathered face softened into a gentle smile as he entered the room. "Of course I did, buddy. How are you feeling?" "Much better." Henry bounced slightly in his bed, then pointed at the bear. "Is that for me?" "Sure is." Caleb handed over the stuffed animal, which Henry immediately hugged tight. "Grace helped me pick it out. She thought you might like a friend to keep you company." Margaret Holloway sat in a chair beside the bed, her usual elegant posture relaxed with relief. She watched the interaction with misty eyes, remembering how just yesterday this kind man had plunged into freezing water without hesitation to save her grandson. "Mr. Caleb is my hero, Grandma," Henry announced proudly, making both adults chuckle, like the ones in my books. The door opened again, and Andrew Holloway entered, his tall frame rigid with unspoken tension. He paused, seeing Caleb, then squared his shoulders and approached. "Mr. Turner," Andrew said stiffly, extending his hand. I owe you an apology. What you did yesterday, saving Henry, I can't thank you enough." Caleb shook the offered hand firmly. "No thanks needed, Mr. Holloway. I just did what anyone would do." "But that's just it," Margaret interjected softly. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have called for help and waited. You acted." A light knock interrupted them. Grace stood in the doorway, carrying a colorful gift bag. Her warm smile lit up the sterile room as she approached Henry's bed. "Hi there," she said kindly. "I'm Grace. I heard you had quite an adventure yesterday." Henry's eyes widened with interest. "Are you Mr. Caleb's daughter? He told me about you." "Do you really draw pictures?" Grace laughed, pulling out a sketchbook from her bag. "I do. Would you like to see some?" As Grace settled onto the edge of Henry's bed, sharing her artwork, the adults moved toward the window. Margaret touched Caleb's arm lightly. "I've been thinking," she said. "Would you consider coming back? Perhaps. Part-time at first. The foundation could use someone with your integrity." Andrew cleared his throat. "The board would welcome it. Your actions yesterday have changed a lot of minds." Caleb glanced at Grace, who was now teaching Henry how to draw a simple cartoon dog. The sight warmed his heart. "I'd be honored, ma'am, but only if we're clear about one thing. I'm here to work, nothing more." "Of course," Margaret nodded, understanding his meaning. "And please, after everything, call me Margaret." The afternoon passed quickly. Henry convinced Grace to draw him as a superhero, complete with a cape and mask. The laughter and chatter filled the room with a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight. A week later, Henry was fully recovered. Margaret insisted on hosting a small dinner to celebrate, transforming the formal dining room into something more intimate and welcoming. The long mahogany table, usually set for business meetings and charity galas, now held just 6 place settings. Caleb and Grace arrived precisely at 6, both dressed in their Sunday best. Henry ran to greet them, his previous energy fully restored. "Grace, come see my new art supplies." He tugged at her hand. "Grandma got them for me because you inspired me." The adults watched as Grace let herself be led away, Henry chattering excitedly about his drawings. Margaret's butler, Edwards, appeared with a tray of appetizers, his usually stoic expression softened by the evening's casual atmosphere. "It's good to have you back, sir," he murmured to Caleb as he passed. Dinner was served. Nothing fancy, just comfort food that reminded Caleb of Sunday family meals from his childhood. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Henry's enthusiastic stories and Grace's gentle encouragement of his artistic endeavors. Even Andrew seemed different, his corporate mask slipping to reveal glimpses of the man beneath. He shared stories about Henry's father, his late brother, speaking with a warmth that surprised everyone. "Remember when James would do magic tricks at dinner?" Margaret asked, her eyes twinkling. "He'd make Henry's vegetables disappear?" "Into his napkin," Andrew chuckled. "Mother always knew but never said anything." The sound of genuine laughter filled the room, not the polite social chuckles of charity events or board meetings, but real, heartfelt joy. Henry demonstrated his own attempt at a magic trick, accidentally dropping a spoon in his excitement. Rather than scold him, Margaret joined in the resulting laughter. "I can't remember the last time this room felt so alive," she admitted, looking around at the smiling faces. Grace, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we find along the way." A thoughtful silence followed her words. Caleb reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand, proud of her wisdom beyond her years. "Out of the mouths of babes," Margaret murmured, raising her water glass. "To found family, then." They all raised their glasses, even Henry with his apple juice, the crystal catching the warm light from the chandelier above. In that moment, the vast dining room felt cozy, filled with the kind of warmth that no amount of wealth could buy. Edwards appeared with dessert, homemade apple pie that filled the air with cinnamon and memories. Henry insisted on sitting between Caleb and Grace, showing them his latest drawing of all of them together. Stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sundae. Margaret watched them, her heart full. The laughter that now filled her home was better than any symphony she'd ever hosted, any charity gala she'd ever thrown. It was the sound of healing, of barriers breaking down, of something new and precious taking root. The celebration dinner had wound down hours ago, leaving Holloway Manor wrapped in peaceful silence. Most of the lights were off, except for the soft glow from the second-floor balcony, where Margaret stood alone, her silver hair catching the moonlight. She gripped the iron railing, lost in thought as she gazed at the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. Caleb had stayed behind to help the staff clean up, a habit from his more humble days that he couldn't shake. As he walked through the darkened hallway toward the exit, he noticed the balcony door slightly ajar. Through the glass, he saw Margaret's silhouette. "Mrs. Holloway," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Is everything all right?" Margaret turned, her elegant features softened by the evening shadows. "Caleb, I thought everyone had gone." She gestured for him to join her. "And please, after everything, I think you can call me Margaret." He stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air carrying the scent of her prized rose garden below. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl, a detail that didn't escape his notice. "It was a wonderful evening," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Henry seems completely recovered." "Yes," Margaret smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Children are remarkably resilient, aren't they? They bounce back so quickly. She paused, her voice growing quieter. Unlike some of us. Caleb waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. I haven't been entirely honest, Margaret continued, her fingers tightening on the railing. Not with anyone, really. But you've shown such integrity, such kindness. She took a deep breath. I've been seeing specialists for months now. My heart, it's not doing well. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Caleb remained silent, offering the gift of his steady presence. The doctors say without surgery, I might have a year, maybe less. Margaret's voice wavered. With surgery, the odds are better, but at my age. She shook her head. I've faced many things in my life, Caleb, but I never thought I'd be afraid of dying alone. I understand fear, Caleb said, softly, thinking of Grace. Every morning I wake up terrified that I won't be enough for my daughter, that I'm failing her somehow. He looked down at his calloused hands. After losing her mother, I promised myself I'd give Grace everything she needs. But sometimes, everything I have still feels like nothing. Margaret turned to face him fully. You're wrong about that. I've seen how Grace looks at you with such pride, such love. She doesn't need everything. She just needs you. And you're not alone, Caleb replied, his voice gentle but firm. You have Henry, who adores his grandmother. You have people who care about you, who would stand by you through any battle. Tears glistened in Margaret's eyes. It's strange, isn't it, how life brings people together? When those men threatened me in the store, I thought that might be the end. But God had other plans. He always does, Caleb agreed, even when we can't see the path ahead. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter, shivering slightly in the night air. Faith was easier when Richard was alive. He always knew what to say, how to make sense of things. She smiled sadly. Much like you do. I don't have any answers, Caleb admitted. But I learned in the army that sometimes just showing up, standing beside someone, that's enough. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker below. A distant church bell chimed midnight, its deep tones floating across the quiet neighborhood. Would you pray with me, Caleb? Margaret asked suddenly, her voice small but hopeful. Of course. She reached out, placing her hand over his where it rested on the railing. Her touch was light but steady, drawing strength from the connection. You saved me once, Caleb, Margaret said softly. But perhaps God sent you to save more than my life. In the gentle darkness, their quiet prayers mingled with the night breeze, two souls finding comfort in shared faith and understanding. Below them, the city continued its nighttime dance of lights and shadows, unaware of the profound moment unfolding on the balcony above. The autumn morning started like any other. Caleb was organizing files in Margaret's study when his phone buzzed. The school's number flashed on the screen. His heart skipped a beat. The school never called unless something was wrong. Mr. Turner? The nurse's voice was tight with concern. Grace collapsed during PE class. She's running a high fever. We've called an ambulance. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled, catching himself against Margaret's mahogany desk. I'm on my way. Caleb? Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face etched with worry. What's wrong? Grace, His voice cracked. I need to go. Take my car. Margaret insisted, but Caleb was already running, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. At the hospital, he found Grace pale and small against the stark white sheets. Doctors moved in and out, speaking in hushed tones about blood tests and inflammation markers. Hours stretched into days. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness, her usual spark dimmed by fever and fatigue. Finally, Dr. Peterson, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, sat down with Caleb in her office. Mr. Turner, Grace has developed a severe autoimmune condition. Her immune system is attacking her own body. Caleb's military training had taught him to stay calm in crisis, but his hands trembled as he gripped the armrests. Can you treat it? Yes, but... Doctor, Peterson hesitated. The medication is expensive. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs are significant. She slid a paper across her desk. Caleb's throat tightened as he read the numbers. The monthly cost was more than he made in 2 months. There are assistance programs, Doctor, Peterson began. I'll figure it out, Caleb cut in, his voice firm despite the fear churning in his stomach. That evening, he walked through their small apartment, seeing it with new eyes. The old, leather couch where they watched movies together. The dining table where Grace did her homework, his wife's antique mirror that had survived 3 moves. Everything had to go. Over the next week, Caleb sold it all. He posted ads online, held a yard sale, visited pawn shops. The car went first. He could take the bus to work. Their furniture disappeared piece by piece, replaced by cheap folding chairs and a borrowed air mattress. Even his wife's wedding ring, the last precious thing he owned, was sold to a jewelry store downtown. At work, he maintained his composure, not wanting Margaret to know. She noticed his exhaustion, but attributed it to worry over Grace's illness. When she offered help, he deflected with practiced ease. "She just needs rest," he'd say, or "the doctors are optimistic." The truth was harder. Despite selling everything they owned, it wasn't enough. The first round of treatment depleted their savings and maxed out his credit cards. Each time he visited the hospital pharmacy, the cost of Grace's medication made him dizzy. 2 weeks after Grace's collapse, Caleb sat beside her hospital bed, holding her thin hand. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the hiss of oxygen. Grace's face was drawn, dark circles under her eyes, making her look older than her 14 years. "Dad?" she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "I'm here, sweetheart." He squeezed her hand gently. "Are you okay? You look tired. Even sick." She worried about him, just like her mother. "I'm fine, Grace. Just focus on getting better." She drifted back to sleep, and Caleb's careful composure cracked. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he watched his daughter's labored breathing. The weight of their situation crashed over him, the mounting bills, the dwindling resources, the desperate fear of losing her. In the dim light of the hospital room, Caleb leaned close to his sleeping daughter. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with emotion. "You're all I've got left." The words hung in the sterile air, a prayer and a confession wrapped in 4 simple words. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware of the quiet struggle playing out in room 412, where a father held his daughter's hand and prayed for a miracle he couldn't afford. Margaret sat in her private study, her hand pressed against her chest as another wave of pain rolled through her. The evening sun cast long shadows across the Persian rug, and the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to mock each precious moment slipping away. Dr. Roberts had been clear that morning. "Mrs. Holloway, your condition has deteriorated significantly. The medication isn't working as we'd hoped. Without surgery, I'm afraid." She'd stopped listening after that, her mind drifting to the letter she needed to write. To Caleb. Sweet, steadfast Caleb, who even now was probably selling everything he owned to save his daughter. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her monogram stationery. The pain struck again, sharper this time. Margaret closed her eyes, waiting for it to pass. When she opened them, her butler, Edwards, stood in the doorway. "Madam, shall I call Master Andrew?" "No," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "Not yet. Please, bring me some tea, Edwards, and make sure I'm not disturbed." Once alone, Margaret began to write, her elegant script less steady than usual. Asterisk, "Dear Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm either in surgery or, well, let's not dwell on that. There's something you need to know. From the moment you saved me from those robbers, God has been showing me why He brought you into my life. I've watched you these past months, your quiet strength, your unwavering faith, even when the world turned against you. You've taught me more about genuine humanity than 30 years in high society ever did. I know about Grace's condition. Yes, Edwards keeps me informed, forgive an old woman's meddling. I know you're too proud to ask for help, just as I'm too stubborn to admit how scared I am right now." Asterisk A. Knock interrupted her writing. Dr. Roberts stood in the doorway, his face grave. "Mrs. Holloway, we need to schedule the surgery. Today." Margaret nodded, turning back to her letter with renewed urgency. Asterisk. "The doctors say I need immediate surgery. My heart, it seems, has finally betrayed me. How ironic that an organ meant for love should cause such pain. I haven't told Andrew. He'd only worry, and honestly, he'd probably blame you somehow. My son has his father's business sense, but none of his compassion. I'm afraid that's partly my fault. Caleb, I've instructed my lawyers to establish a trust for Grace's medical care, regardless of what happens to me. Please don't refuse this. Consider it repayment for the life you saved, not just from those robbers, but from the loneliness that was slowly killing me. You showed me that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we give. You gave me your loyalty when others gave only flattery. You gave me friendship when I was surrounded by sycophants. Most importantly, you gave me hope when I'd forgotten how to believe in goodness. The pain returned, more intense than before. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Edwards appeared instantly at her side. "Madam, the car is ready." "Doctor." "Roberts insists we leave now." Margaret nodded, forcing herself to finish the letter. They're taking me to the hospital now. Whatever happens, know that you and Grace have been the greatest blessing of my latter years. Your friendship restored my faith in God, in humanity, in the power of simple kindness. If I don't survive this, please look after my grandson Henry. He needs a role model like you. And please accept the help I'm offering, Grace. Let my last act be one of love, not pride. With deepest affection, Margaret *. She sealed the envelope with trembling fingers and handed it to Edwards. "Give this to Caleb Turner if things don't go well." The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of city lights and quiet prayers. In her private room, Margaret stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Below, people hurried about their lives, unaware of the battles being fought in the rooms above them. Her hand found its way to the small cross she always wore, a gift from her late husband. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital's quiet hum, "if I can't be healed, let me help him." She thought of Grace, so young and full of promise, fighting her own battle in another hospital across town. She thought of Caleb, wearing himself thin, trying to be both mother and father, provider and protector. A tear slipped down her cheek as she watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The door opened behind her. "Doctor." Roberts entered with his surgical team. "Mrs. Holloway, it's time." Margaret nodded, taking one last look at the darkening city below. In that moment, she felt a strange peace settle over her. Whatever happened next was in God's hands. The rain drummed against the windows of Caleb's small apartment, each drop echoing the weight in his heart. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of hospital bills, when his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Holloway Estate. His stomach tightened. Calls this late rarely brought good news. "Mr. Turner?" The voice belonged to Margaret's butler, James. "Mrs. Holloway has collapsed at the spring charity gala. They've taken her to Cedar Falls Memorial." Caleb's chest constricted. "I'm on my way." He grabbed his jacket, scribbled a note for Grace, and rushed out into the downpour. The streets glistened under streetlights, puddles splashing beneath his tires as he navigated through the empty city. His mind raced with memories of Margaret's recent pallor, the way she'd touch her chest when she thought no one was looking. The hospital's emergency entrance blazed with fluorescent light. Caleb parked haphazardly and ran inside, water dripping from his clothes. The waiting room buzzed with concerned voices, board members in evening wear, their fancy clothes out of place against the sterile walls. Andrew Holloway paced near the information desk, his bow tie hanging loose. When he saw Caleb, relief flickered across his face. "Turner, thank God. They're saying something about her heart." A doctor in blue scrubs approached them, her expression grave. "Are you family?" "I'm her son," Andrew said. "And this is Caleb Turner. I'm Mrs. Holloway's." He hesitated. "Her friend?" Andrew finished, surprising Caleb. The doctor nodded. "I'm Dr. Chen. Mrs. Holloway needs emergency surgery, but we've run into a complication. She has a rare blood type, AB negative, and our supplies are critically low. Without proper blood supplies, the surgery would be extremely risky." Caleb's heart jumped. "I'm AB negative." Dr. Chen's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "Yes, found out in the Army. I can donate." "Mr. Turner, you understand this would be a significant donation? Mrs. Holloway's condition." "Where do I sign?" Caleb interrupted. Within minutes, he lay on a bed in the donation room, sleeve rolled up, watching his blood flow through the tube. The nurse worked efficiently, explaining the process, but Caleb barely heard her. His thoughts were with Margaret, imagining her lying somewhere in this massive building, fighting for her life. Time crawled. His arm ached. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He thought of his wife's final days in a room like this, of Grace sleeping in her hospital bed just floors away. The circle of life and death, of giving and receiving, spun through his mind like the rain outside. An hour later, Dr. Chen returned. Her face had softened. "Mr. Turner, I wanted to tell you personally the surgery was successful. Your blood type was an exact match, and the transfusion helped stabilize her condition enough for us to proceed. You likely saved her life tonight." Caleb's throat tightened. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery now. It'll be several hours before she's conscious, but you're welcome to wait." In the waiting room, Caleb sank into an uncomfortable chair. The adrenaline drained from his body, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Andrew sat nearby, his phone constantly buzzing with updates from board members and family. "Turner," Andrew said quietly, "I owe you an apology for everything, the way I treated you before." He shook his head. "Mother always saw something in you that I was too blind to see." Caleb nodded, too tired for words. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, washing the world clean. In the harsh hospital lighting, with his dress shirt wrinkled and his hair disheveled, Andrew looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a worried son. Hospital staff moved efficiently through the room. Monitors beeped in distant corridors. A janitor mopped the floors, his squeaking cart a counterpoint to the rain. Caleb's arm throbbed where they'd drawn blood, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that meant someone else might live. He thought of Margaret's quiet strength, her gentle wisdom, the way she'd light up when talking about her charitable projects, how she'd slip extra cookies to Grace when she thought no one was watching. The world needed people like her, people who saw past surface appearances to the heart beneath. The night deepened. Most of the gala attendees had gone home, leaving behind empty coffee cups and crumpled magazines. Andrew dozed in his chair, his phone finally silent. Caleb's eyelids grew heavy, but he fought sleep. He needed to know Margaret would be okay. A nurse approached with a clipboard, checking details and vitals. "The donation center asked me to remind you to take it easy for the next few days, Mr. Turner." "That was a significant amount of blood you gave." Caleb barely heard her. His mind was already drifting to Grace, to tomorrow's hospital visit, to the mounting bills that threatened to drown them. But for now, in this moment, he had done what needed doing. He had helped someone who needed help. Sometimes, that was enough. The rain slowed to a gentle patter, and the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. Caleb sat in the hard hospital chair, unaware that while he had been giving blood, Margaret's legal team had been setting something in motion, something that would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the sterile linoleum floor. Caleb sat in the worn waiting room chair, his shoulders hunched with exhaustion. 2 days had passed since he donated blood for Margaret, and the weight of Grace's mounting medical bills still pressed heavily on his mind. Dr. Sarah Chin, Grace's physician, approached with a tablet in her hands and an unusually bright expression. Her sensible shoes squeaked softly against the floor as she came to stand before him. "Mr. Turner?" Her voice was gentle, but carried a note of something he couldn't quite place. "Could you step into my office for a moment?" Caleb's heart clenched. He'd been dreading another discussion about payment plans or experimental treatments they couldn't afford. Standing slowly, he followed Dr. Chin down the quiet hallway, past the nurse's station where the morning shift was just settling in. The doctor's office was small, but neat, with a few cheerful paintings of flowers brightening the walls. She gestured for him to take a seat across from her desk. "I have some rather surprising news, Doctor," Chin began, adjusting her glasses. "It seems all of Grace's hospital bills have been paid in full." Caleb blinked, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Everything. The treatments, medications, hospital stay, it's all been taken care of." She smiled warmly. "By an anonymous donor." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Caleb gripped the arms of his chair, his throat tight. That's impossible. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." I double-checked myself. "The payment has been processed and cleared." Dr. Chin's eyes crinkled kindly. "Someone very generous has given your daughter a tremendous gift, Mr. Turner." Caleb sat in stunned silence, his mind immediately going to Margaret. It had to be her, but how would she manage this from her own hospital bed? And why would she do this for him? I need to see someone," he managed to say, standing on slightly shaky legs. "Thank you, Doctor Chin." The walk to Margaret's wing of the hospital felt both endless and too quick. His thoughts tumbled over each other as he tried to process what had happened. The halls were quieter here, more private, fitting for someone of Margaret's status. Outside her room, he paused to collect himself. Through the small window in the door, he could see her lying there, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. Medical monitors beeped steadily beside her bed, their green lines tracking her heartbeat. He knocked softly before entering. Margaret's eyes fluttered open as he approached, and a weak smile spread across her pale face. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice rough but warm. I was hoping you'd come. He pulled a chair close to her bedside, noting how the morning light softened the shadows under her eyes. Margaret, did you? He couldn't quite finish the question. She reached out with one thin hand, tubes and monitors trailing from her arm, and touched his wrist. You gave me your blood, she said simply. Now let me give you your life back. The emotion Caleb had been holding back crashed over him like a wave. His vision blurred as tears welled up in his eyes. Why? He managed to ask. After everything. Because you never asked for anything, Margaret replied softly. In all the time I've known you, you've only given. To Grace, to me, to everyone around you. She squeezed his wrist gently. Let someone give to you for once, Caleb. He bowed his head, unable to speak as tears rolled down his cheeks. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, relief, gratitude, and overwhelming emotion all mixed together. Margaret's hand moved to grip his, her touch warm and reassuring despite her weakness. For several long moments, they sat in comfortable silence, broken only by the steady beeping of the monitors and the muffled sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Caleb's tears gradually slowed, but he kept hold of Margaret's hand, anchoring himself in her kindness. Grace, he finally managed to say, his voice rough. She'll be able to get all the treatment she needs now. Margaret's smile widened slightly. That's all I wanted to hear. She closed her eyes briefly, clearly tired but content. You saved my life that night at the store, Caleb. Then you saved it again with your blood. But more than that, she opened her eyes to look at him directly. You showed me what true integrity looks like, what real faith means. Caleb gripped her hand tighter, still unable to find words adequate to express his gratitude. The morning sun continued to stream through the window, warming them both as they sat together, connected by something deeper than words could express. The late autumn breeze rustled through the maples lining the Holloway Estate's driveway, their leaves a brilliant tapestry of gold and crimson. Caleb sat on a wooden bench near the garden where he'd saved Henry months ago, watching Grace sketch the fountain in her new art pad. Her color had returned, and though still thin, she moved with renewed energy that made his heart swell. The crunch of expensive shoes on gravel made him turn. Andrew Holloway approached, his usual tailored suit replaced by casual slacks and a sweater. Something in his stance had changed. The rigid authority had softened into something more human. Mr. Turner? Andrew said, stopping a few feet away. Do you mind if I join you, please? Caleb gestured to the empty space beside him. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Grace add delicate details to her drawing. Andrew cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, Mr. Turner. Several, actually. Caleb, he corrected gently, and no apologies needed. You were protecting your mother. No, Andrew shook his head firmly. I was protecting my pride. There's a difference. He clasped his hands together, leaning forward. When my father died, I thought strength meant control. I became so focused on preserving his legacy that I forgot what that legacy truly was. Grace looked up and waved at them both before returning to her sketch. Andrew waved back, a small smile crossing his face. Mother told me about your wife, he continued. About how you've raised Grace alone, never compromising your principles, even when it cost you everything. He turned to face Caleb directly. You gave blood for my mother without hesitation, even while your own daughter was ill. That's the kind of strength my father believed in, the kind I lost sight of. Caleb felt the familiar ache in his chest whenever someone mentioned his late wife. Sarah taught me that true strength is serving others, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Yes, Andrew nodded slowly. That's exactly what Mother keeps saying about you. He pulled out a folder from his leather briefcase. Which is why I'd like to propose something. He opened the folder, revealing architectural drawings and budgets. The Turner Holloway Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting single parents, veterans, and families in medical crisis. Mother's already approved the initial funding, but he hesitated. We'd like you to help run it. Caleb stared at the papers, emotion tightening his throat. The proposed building would include a community center, counseling services, and emergency housing. Your experience, your character, they're exactly what this project needs. Andrew continued, and I'd be honored to work alongside you, to learn from your example. Grace had wandered over, her sketch pad tucked under her arm. She peeked at the drawings, her eyes widening. Dad, look, they included an art therapy room. Andrew smiled warmly at her. Your mother was an art teacher, wasn't she? We thought this would be a fitting tribute. Caleb touched the drawings gently, seeing Sarah's legacy and his own journey woven into every detail. This is incredible. There's more, Andrew said, standing. Mother wanted to tell you herself, but she's still resting. Please, follow me. He led them down a winding path through the gardens to a charming two-story cottage, its stone walls covered in ivy. A small brass key gleamed in Andrew's palm. The caretaker's cottage, he explained. Recently renovated. Mother would like you and Grace to consider it home, if you're willing. It would make managing the foundation easier. And? He smiled sheepishly. Henry's been begging to have his hero closer. Grace gasped softly, touching the cottage's warm stones. Dad, it's just like the one in Mom's favorite painting, Caleb remembered. A Thomas Kincaid print Sarah had hung in their first apartment, promising someday they'd live in a place just as beautiful. His vision blurred. I know it's a lot to take in, Andrew said quietly. But Mother and I agree. You've become family. And family takes care of each other. Grace slipped her hand into Caleb's, looking up at him with hope shining in her eyes. Dad? Caleb squeezed her hand, remembering his prayers during those dark nights after losing his job. God had not only provided, He had restored what was lost tenfold. Please thank your mother for us, he said to Andrew, his voice rough with emotion. We'd be honored to accept both offers. Andrew's professional mask cracked completely as he broke into a genuine smile. Welcome home, then. He handed Caleb the key. And welcome to the family. The autumn sunlight caught the brass key in Caleb's palm, warm and promising. Grace hugged him tightly, and, over her head, he saw Margaret standing at her bedroom window. She raised her hand in blessing, and he nodded, grateful beyond words for this new chapter God had written for them all. Autumn sunlight spilled across the newly constructed Turner Holloway Veterans and Family Support Center, its red brick facade gleaming against the cloudless October sky. The building stood proudly at the edge of Cedar Falls, a testament to what faith and perseverance could achieve. Rows of white folding chairs filled the courtyard, packed with community members, veterans, and local officials. American flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, and a wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance, waiting to be cut. Caleb Turner adjusted his tie, the same one Grace had helped him pick for his first day as Margaret's driver. His hands trembled slightly as he looked over his note cards. Though he knew the words by heart, at 46, he'd faced combat and loss. Yet, speaking in front of crowds still made his palms sweat. In the front row, Margaret Holloway sat regally in a powder blue dress suit. Though thinner now, her eyes sparkled with the same determination that had carried her through her recovery. Henry, her grandson, sat beside her, his small hand clutching hers. The boy wore a miniature suit that matched Caleb's, something he'd insisted on. Grace stood near the podium, her sketch pad tucked under one arm. The morning sun caught the silver charm bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Margaret on her last birthday. Her autoimmune condition was in remission now, and color had returned to her cheeks. She gave her father an encouraging thumbs up. The mayor finished his introduction, and Caleb stepped up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. 6 months ago, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I stood in a convenience store, working the night shift as a security guard. I had bills piling up, a daughter to support, and not much else but faith to keep me going. He paused, meeting Margaret's eyes. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. That night, God put me exactly where I needed to be, not just to help someone in danger, but to start a chain of events that would change many lives, including my own. Several people nodded, remembering the news stories that had first condemned, then celebrated him. This center, Caleb gestured to the building behind him, isn't just about providing services. It's about recognizing that every person who walks through these doors has value. That sometimes the difference between despair and hope is knowing someone cares. Henry wiggled in his seat, eager to participate in the ribbon cutting. Margaret gently settled him with a touch on his shoulder. When I came home from the army, I thought my days of serving were over, but Mrs. Holloway taught me that service takes many forms. Sometimes it's running into danger. Sometimes it's simply extending a hand to someone who's falling. Caleb's voice grew stronger as he continued, This center will offer job training, counseling, childcare, and emergency assistance to veterans and families in crisis. But more than that, it will offer dignity, because that's what Mrs. Holloway showed me when she looked past the headlines and saw a person trying his best to do right. In the audience, several veterans nodded solemnly. Andrew Holloway, Margaret's son, sat straighter in his chair, pride replacing the suspicion that had once clouded his face. Today, we're not just opening a building. We're opening our hearts to the idea that everyone deserves a second chance. That kindness multiplies. That faith, even in the darkest moments, lights the way forward. Grace moved closer to the ribbon, scissors ready. Henry bounced up from his seat to join her, his small dress shoes clicking on the pavement. Mrs. Holloway likes to say, "I saved her life that night at the store." But the truth is, her compassion saved mine. And, together, through this center, we hope to pass that blessing forward. Caleb stepped back from the podium as applause filled the courtyard. He walked over to where Grace and Henry waited by the ribbon. "Ready?" he asked them both. Henry beamed up at him. "Ready, Mr. Caleb!" Grace positioned the scissors, letting Henry wrap his small hands around one handle while she held the other. Together, they cut the red ribbon as cameras flashed and cheers erupted. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief, her smile radiant despite her tears. She had changed too, from a lonely widow protecting her wealth to a woman who had rediscovered her purpose. The standing ovation continued as Henry ran back to hug his grandmother. Grace slipped her hand into her father's, and Caleb squeezed it gently, remembering all the prayers they'd shared during her illness. Margaret's tears flowed freely now, but her smile never wavered as she looked at the family that fate or faith had brought together. The evening air carried the sweet scent of Margaret's prized roses as she and Caleb sat in her garden sanctuary. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the intimate space, their light dancing off the silver tea service between them. The foundation's grand opening earlier that day had left them both emotionally drained but fulfilled. Margaret's hands wrapped around her delicate china teacup, steadier now than they'd been in months. The surgery and recovery had restored some of her vigor, though she still moved with careful grace. Her silver hair caught the lamplight as she studied Caleb's face across the small garden table. "I never thought I'd see this garden filled with so much life again," she said softly. "After Richard passed, I let everything wither. Even the roses nearly died." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Sometimes it takes another person's faith to help us remember our own," he replied, his voice gentle. Margaret smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't for years. "When you ran into that store that night, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" "Honestly?" Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. "I was just trying to make it through each day. Keeping Grace fed, keeping our apartment, trying to hold on to whatever job I could find." He paused, looking out over the garden. "But I've learned that God's plans are bigger than our struggles." "Indeed they are." Margaret set her cup down with a quiet clink. "You know, when Richard first built this estate, he had such dreams, not just for wealth, but for making a difference. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. The money became everything." Her voice carried a hint of old regret. "It's not too late," Caleb assured her. "Look at what we've built together. That center will help hundreds of families. Because of you, Caleb, your courage that night, and every day since." Margaret's eyes grew misty. "You showed me what real integrity looks like, not in grand gestures, but in quiet faithfulness." She reached beside her chair, lifting a small wooden box onto the table. The mahogany gleamed in the lantern light as she opened it carefully. "This was Richard's," she said, removing an elegant gold watch. Its face caught the light, revealing intricate craftsmanship that spoke of both luxury and timeless dignity. He wore it every day until he passed. Said it reminded him that every moment was precious, meant for something greater than himself. Caleb's eyes widened as she held it out to him. "Margaret, I couldn't possibly. Please," she interrupted gently. "You remind me what real honor looks like. What Richard used to stand for, before we lost our way." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the watch in his palm. "You'll carry his legacy forward better than anyone else could." Caleb stared at the watch, emotion tightening his throat. The weight of it felt both heavy and right in his hands. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll remember that every second chance is sacred," Margaret replied. "That's what you taught me, after all." He carefully fastened the watch around his wrist, the leather band smooth against his skin. "I promise to honor what it represents," he said quietly. "Both Richard's memory and your trust." Margaret reached across the table, patting his hand. "You already have, dear friend, every day since you came into our lives." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea as evening deepened around them. The garden's shadows lengthened, but the lanterns kept the darkness at bay. In the distance, church bells began to toll, their deep, resonant tones floating across the estate. Caleb glanced up at the emerging stars, bright points of light piercing the darkening sky. Each one seemed to shimmer with possibility, with hope. The watch ticked steadily on his wrist, marking moments that felt both ordinary and profound. Amazing how much can change in a year, he mused, his voice soft. Margaret nodded, following his gaze upward. Grace is thriving in her new school. Henry adores having you both here. And the foundation? She smiled. It's everything Richard would have wanted. Everything I needed to remember. The church bells faded into the night, leaving only the gentle chorus of crickets and the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. Stars continued to appear one by one, each one a reminder of divine timing and purpose. The Sunday morning sun painted Cedar Falls in brilliant hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the quiet streets as the town awakened to a day that would be remembered for years to come. A gentle breeze carried the sweet, earthy scent of newly planted flowers across the Veterans Memorial grounds, where dozens of saplings waited in their temporary pots, like eager children, their roots yearning to sink deep into the fresh, dark soil that had been carefully prepared for this moment. Caleb Turner stood between Grace and Margaret, his weathered hands resting on the smooth wooden handle of a ceremonial shovel. The calluses on his palms told the story of years of hard work, from his military service to the countless nights of security shifts, from moving boxes to caring for his daughter through her illness. The memorial's polished granite walls gleamed like mirrors in the morning light, each surface meticulously etched with the names of those who had served their country with honor. Rows of white folding chairs faced the temporary podium where the mayor would soon speak, filled with townspeople who had come to witness this moment of renewal and hope. The crowd was larger than anyone had expected. Families with children, elderly veterans wearing their service pins with pride, young couples holding hands, and teenagers who had taken time from their weekend to be part of something meaningful. Many faces were familiar to Caleb, now people he'd met through the foundation, store owners who'd seen him walking Grace to school, neighbors who'd watched his quiet acts of kindness over the years. Grace, her health fully restored and her cheeks glowing with the vitality of youth, practically bounced with excitement beside her father. Her long brown hair was tied back with a sunny yellow ribbon that perfectly matched her sundress, a dress Margaret had insisted on buying for her, saying every young lady needed something special for such an important day. Grace kept pointing out different trees to Margaret, rattling off their scientific and common names from the extensive research she'd conducted at the library. That one's a red maple Acer rubrum, and over there, that's going to be a flowering dogwood. Did you know they can live for over 80 years? Margaret smiled warmly at the teenager's boundless enthusiasm, her heart swelling with the kind of maternal pride she'd thought lost forever. The past months had been remarkably kind to her. Her cheeks held a healthy glow that spoke of renewed purpose, and though she still carried her elegant mahogany cane, she rarely needed to lean on it anymore. She wore a pale blue suit that complemented the spring morning perfectly, and a small golden cross pendant caught the sunlight at her throat, a gift from Caleb that had belonged to his late wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Richardson's voice carried clearly across the gathering, amplified by the small sound system they'd set up for the occasion. We're here today not just to dedicate this memorial, but to celebrate the spirit of service and sacrifice that makes our community truly strong. The crowd settled into their seats with the quiet reverence of people who understood they were witnessing history. Children stopped their fidgeting and whispered conversations, sensing the importance of the moment. Conversations hushed to respectful whispers as anticipation filled the air. In the front row, Andrew Holloway sat with his son Henry, who waved enthusiastically at Caleb with the unrestrained joy of a child who'd found his hero. The boy had grown remarkably attached to the quiet man who'd saved his grandmother, often begging to help at the foundation office whenever he visited, his small hands eager to sort donation letters or help carry supplies. Today, we plant these trees as living symbols of growth, sacrifice, and new beginnings. The mayor continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Each one represents a story of courage, determination, and the willingness to stand up for what's right, just like the remarkable story that brought us all here today. He gestured toward Caleb, Margaret, and Grace with obvious pride and respect. Grace squeezed her father's hand tightly as the mayor began recounting that fateful night at the convenience store, how one man's selfless act had sparked a chain of events that had transformed not just individual lives, but their entire community. The Turner Holloway Foundation had already helped dozens of veterans and struggling families find their footing again, providing everything from job training to emergency medical assistance, from housing support to educational scholarships. And so, Mayor Richardson's voice swelled with genuine pride and emotion. It is my great honor to announce that Caleb Turner has been awarded the City Medal of Courage, our highest civilian honor, in recognition of his extraordinary bravery and continued service to our community. Thunderous applause erupted across the memorial grounds, echoing off the granite walls and rolling across the surrounding neighborhoods. Caleb felt his cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and deep emotion as Grace threw her arms around him in an exuberant hug, her yellow ribbon coming loose in her excitement. Margaret touched his shoulder gently, her eyes glistening with tears of pure joy and gratitude. The mayor approached with the medal, its bronze surface polished to a mirror shine and catching the morning light like a small sundae. The ribbon was a deep blue, representing honor and service. As he placed it around Caleb's neck, photographers' cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment for posterity. But Caleb barely noticed the flashing lights or the crowd's continued applause. His thoughts drifted naturally to his late wife Sarah, wondering if she could somehow see this moment, if she was proud of the man he'd become and the daughter they'd raised together. "Would the three of you please lead us in planting the first tree?" the mayor asked, gesturing toward a young oak sapling that stood ready in its biodegradable pot, its leaves already showing the fresh green of spring growth. Together, they stepped forward, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. Grace carried the brass watering can that had been specially purchased for the ceremony, while Margaret held the ceremonial golden spade that gleamed in the sunlight. Caleb lifted the sapling carefully from its pot, cradling its root ball as if it were the most precious cargo in the world, feeling the weight of responsibility and hope it represented. The hole had been pre-dug by the groundskeeping crew, its edges neat and precise, waiting for this pivotal moment. Rich, dark soil was piled nearby, mixed with compost and nutrients to give the young tree the best possible start. Caleb lowered the oak with infinite reverence, remembering all the times he'd felt utterly hopeless, all the long nights he'd spent praying for guidance, all the moments when he'd wondered if doing the right thing was worth the cost. Grace began sprinkling water around the exposed roots with the concentration of a child performing a sacred ritual, while Margaret added the first ceremonial shovelful of soil, her movements deliberate and meaningful. The rich earth fell around the roots like a blessing, securing the tree in its new home. "This oak," Margaret announced to the gathering, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the memorial grounds with the authority of someone who had learned to speak from the heart, represents second chances and the power of community. Like this tree, we all need strong roots and helping hands to grow into what we're meant to become. More enthusiastic applause followed as other families began moving toward their designated planting spots throughout the memorial grounds. The peaceful morning came alive with purposeful activity, children carrying watering cans with serious expressions, parents teaching proper planting techniques to eager young hands, veterans sharing war stories and memories as they worked the soil together, their voices mingling with laughter and the occasional tears of remembrance. Henry broke away from his father's side and ran to help Grace water their newly planted oak, his small legs carrying him swiftly across the grass. "Can I help plant the next one, Mr. Caleb?" he asked eagerly, his face bright with excitement and admiration. "Of course, buddy," Caleb replied, warmly, ruffling the boy's sandy hair with affection. "There's always room for another helper in this work. That's what community means." As the morning progressed and the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, the memorial grounds underwent a remarkable transformation. Where there had been carefully maintained but empty spaces between the granite memorial walls, young trees now stood proud and straight, their leaves dancing gracefully in the spring breeze like nature's own celebration. Each sapling represented a story, a hope, a future filled with possibility and growth. The mayor returned to the podium one final time, his own hands now dirty from helping with the planting, his formal suit jacket long since discarded in favor of rolled-up sleeves. "These trees will grow with our community," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy and promise. "They'll provide shade for future generations, beauty for decades to come, and serve as a living reminder of how one person's courage can change countless lives." Standing beside their oak sapling, now firmly rooted in Cedar Falls soil, Caleb felt overwhelmed by the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of triumph. He remembered with crystal clarity the night he'd lost his job for helping Margaret, the financial struggles that had followed, the fear and desperation when Grace fell ill, the times when keeping faith had seemed impossible. Yet here they were, whole, healthy, surrounded by love and purpose, part of something much larger than themselves. Margaret slipped her hand into his, her fingers warm and steady, while Grace leaned against his other side, her head resting on his shoulder with complete trust and contentment. The three of them stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the morning sun climbed higher into the perfect blue sky, bathing the memorial grounds in brilliant, hope-filled light. The new trees cast their very first shadows on the ground, promising years of growth, beauty, and shelter ahead. Caleb felt a profound sense of gratitude well up inside him, like a spring of clear water. Gratitude for his daughter's complete recovery, for Margaret's unwavering friendship and trust, for second chances and new beginnings, for a community that had learned to see past first impressions to the heart beneath. Looking toward the brightening sky, where a few wispy clouds drifted like prayers across the infinite blue, he whispered words that came straight from his heart, words that carried the weight of his entire journey. "Thank you for bringing us home." The morning sun continued its eternal ascent, washing the world in golden light that seemed to bless everything it touched. Below, the newly planted memorial stood as a living testament to faith, courage, and the miraculous power of compassion to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. In the years to come, children would play in the shade of these trees, families would picnic on the grass beneath their branches, and veterans would find peace walking among the living monuments to service and sacrifice. The Turner Holloway Foundation would continue to grow, just like the trees they'd planted today, reaching out to help more families, more veterans, more people who had fallen through society's cracks. And at the center of it all would be the quiet man who had simply chosen to do the right thing, no matter the cost, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the world. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Caleb Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.